Welcome to Table Talk, the place for deep conversations in the Geekverse. And trust me, when we tear into a subject, we go deep. I'm Heath, and I'll be your host. Each episode, I'll be talking with one or more creators, authors, illustrators, publishers, or other movers and shakers in games, TV, books, movies, or other areas of the Geekverse. Regular guests include Douglas A. Burton, the author of Faraway Bird, a multi-award-winning historical fiction novel of the Byzantine Empress Theodora. He's also the author of The Heroine's Labyrinth, an alternative story structure to the hero's journey that often occurs in stories with feminine heroes. That structural framework frequently comes up in our analysis of story. Brianna De Silva, she's the director and co-writer of The Cultists, a Lovecraftian comedy mockumentary-style web show here on YouTube. And the author of The City of Reckoning, an epic fantasy novel of political intrigue, the ethics of war, and young love. Cameron Pasha is a screenwriter, director, novelist, and was a writer and producer on the series Kings, a producer on NBC's Bionic Woman, and a co-producer and writer for Sleeper Cell. He's also written for the CW series Nikita and Roswell, New Mexico. He's been breaking news from inside Lucasfilm, Disney, and Hollywood. His analysis and commentary have become very popular on YouTube. We regularly meet to discuss and analyze stories, and when we do, we dive into graduate-level seminars on story structure and writing. Come on in and let's go deep. And when I say we're going deep, I mean you'd better bring your hard suit. Other guests have included Lou Anders, the author of the Thrones and Bones fantasy novels Once Upon a Unicorn, the creator and publisher of the Norengard RPG, and the author of Star Wars: A Pirate's Price, the book that explains why the Millennium Falcon is on the planet Batu at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Mark Tassin, the creator of the World of Ataltis, head of Mechanical Muse, former director of the Gen Con Writers Symposium, and the head developer of the new Cool Name RPG. Let's see, who else?
Bond. James Bond.
Well, not James Bond. Not yet. Maybe soon, though. But I have interviewed Jamie Stegmaier, the founder of Stonemaier Games, crowdfunder extraordinaire, and publisher of many hit board games like Scythe and Wingspan. Brian Colin, sculptor of the world of Revelo Monster Busts, and the creator of the vast, grim, dark horror RPG. Ajit George, the Dungeons & Dragons author. We talked about game writing, education, and his contribution to Van Richter's Guide to Ravenloft, and the development of the Journeys to the Radiant Citadel.
I am Hela, Odin's firstborn, the commander of the legions of Asgard, the rightful heir to the throne, and the goddess of death.
Well, actually, that interview got rather spicy, so I think I'd better just keep that one to myself. Kate Wilson, a YouTuber, actress, host, and prolific geek guru who's now working to make a new show dedicated to the world of tabletop gaming a reality. So buckle up and get ready for a wild ride, because it's time to explore the worlds of tabletop gaming, sci-fi, fantasy, and all of geekdom through the eyes of those who are making things happen.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger, ready to move out.
It's time for Table Talk. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It is so great to have you here. Welcome to my home. Welcome to the office. Welcome to Table Talk. I am so happy that you are here. Tonight, we are going to be discussing Napoleon, which is one of my favorite topics because actually it's kind of a tradition, at least on my mother's side of the family, that all of the guys go through a Napoleon phase around 6th or 7th grade, and I certainly did. So I've got a lot to say about this, and in fact, I've got more than just my share to say about this because I've got my notes here on Napoleon. Here are my notes on the Napoleon, and then I was sent notes by two other people. I've got Wild Barley's notes right here, and I've got my Uncle Robert's notes as well right here. And if that's not enough, I'm bringing on an entire another brain and all of his notes. And that is channel favorite, Douglas A. Burton. Welcome.
What's happening, everybody?
So we've got lots, I am sure, to go over here with this film.
Lots of opinions on the table.
Yes. And I'm seeing lots of people in the chat already. Man, we already have a super chat coming in. I'll get that. We got James here. Welcome, James. We've got Tomocrat. Welcome.
Awesome.
Sherry, welcome. Good to see you. Robert, come in. Hello. Come on in. Let's have a great time. Positive Phantom is here. It's
Awesome.
Welcome. So glad to have you here. Welcome to the show. We've got a great crew tonight. I noticed there were lots of people already waiting in the waiting room for this show. Tomocrat's here. I don't want to miss anybody. Tomocrat. Nathaniel, Nathaniel, welcome. I was actually just oddly enough thinking about you this afternoon because I was looking at the Geekverse channel members. And so good to see you, Nathaniel. Good to see you. Let's see. We've got, who else have we got here? Sable Phoenix is here. So
Yes.
welcome, Sable Phoenix. Although dental issues going, yeah, we're definitely here. Good, bad, and ugly. I got the full cannonade here. But dental work today. I am so sorry, Sable. So that's all right. Maybe Table Talk will make it all better. All right, let's see. BGD. Oh, BGD is here. Good evening. All right. Let's see. First of all, before we even introduce ourselves and things like this, Doug, we should bring up that over on the Table Talk channel, because we're dual streaming. Yes, we're streaming over on the Heath's Geekverse channel, but we've been establishing Table Talk as its own channel and its own brand over on its own channel, Table Talk channel, where we are also live. We're trying to bridge this, to make this bridge here. And this week, we passed over the 500 subscriber mark on Table Talk. So Table Talk now has 554 subscribers.
That's awesome.
Yes. Thank you to everyone who is over here. I put a link to that. So if you're on the Heath's Geekverse channel, we're not going to be eternally dual streaming Table Talk. We're going to be moving, over to just the Table Talk channel as we continue to build over here, and we'll be able to take super chats and things like that over on this channel. But first of all, I got wine especially for this toast tonight.
Funny enough, so did I, Heath.
Here we go. All right, so this is to all 554 subscribers of the Table Talk channel who have come in. Thank you all.
This is to you guys. That's right.
This is to you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Awesome.
Thank you to everyone who's been a part of this.
That's a nice little benchmark to get to. It's also one of the steps toward the channel. They say monetization, but really the idea of an independent channel. So, one step closer. We're doing great.
Yes, that is huge. We've been doing very well over here. So, Doug, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? I'm
sure.
Bring up your book.
My name is Doug Burton, and I'm an author. And it's relevant to tonight's discussion because I am an author of historical fiction. So I have certain attitudes and sentiments and beliefs about how to do historical fiction correctly or not. And what's interesting is I chronicle the Byzantine Empire. My novel is about Byzantine Empress Theodora. And oddly enough, there's a lot of similarities historically between her era in the 6th century Byzantium and the Napoleonic era in 19th century, 18th and 19th century France. So anyway, it's relevant to tonight. I do have some opinions about the way they laid this out and the story narrative that they chose, and whether that was effective. And I'm sure anyone who's seen it will have their own thought on that as well. So, but anyway, that's the book that I have written. I also have another book coming out in February 2024, based on archetypal designs in heroine-led fiction. And that book, of course, is called The Heroine's Labyrinth.
All right. And we've talked a lot about the Heroine's Labyrinth. And actually, a lot of the Heroine's Labyrinth discussion is going to be coming back over to this channel. In a few more weeks, I've been chronologically going through and re-releasing on Sunday afternoons at 1:00 p.m. I've been releasing a Table Talk kind of from the archive that's coming over from the Heath's Geekverse channels now to make it a permanent home over here. And so there's going to be a lot of stuff coming out about the Heroine's Labyrinth in the coming weeks. The whole theory articulated will be here on the channel.
Yay.
Let's see. Now over here today, I just released just started The Trial of St. Gabriel Kickstarter. This is my story. This is a short story. The Trial of St. Gabriel, the dark story of the Bethlehem Christmas massacre. This is a Christmas story, or at least it tells the story, the Christmas story right here. The Trial of St. Gabriel on Kickstarter. On Kickstarter right now. I just put that link in the chat. I've got the book right here, the physical book. So there are both ebooks. The ebook is only $4. The ebook is only $4 on the Kickstarter page. So if you would be interested in taking a look or reading The Trial of St. Gabriel, you can pick it up on the Kickstarter page. But also, this is a proof of the physical soft copy that's also available. We went over it on the morning grind today. There are a couple of things I'm going to change. So I'm relaying this out, and I'm going to get another proof. But basically, the story's done. You want the physical copy or the ebook? It is there. And like I said, the ebook is only $4. So please come over to The Trial of St. Gabriel and make a pledge.
And I can tell you, I have read it, and it is good. It is very engaging, and it's something that you haven't read before. So it will catch you off guard, and it'll kind of grab a hold of you as you go from beginning straight to the end.
Doug provided one of the quotes that's on the page. You tapped into an incredible archetypal power of the. Let me start over. You tapped into the incredible archetypical power of the biblical story from a different angle, and it totally works. That's from Douglas A. Burton, author of Faraway Bird and The Heroine's Labyrinth. Right there on the page. And also we've got James Bacon. Good Lord, this dialogue is incredible. He's here in the chat. I'm severely impressed. Incredible. I felt this in my gut, says James Bacon. Brianna, who is not here tonight, said a very distinctive writing style that has such a mythic, grandiose tone to it. It's just begging to be read out loud. So Brianna's not here tonight, but that's what she said. And that's what she said. Then Josiah Firesnake on YouTube said, "What a classic. If I had $1 for every Christmas tale that casually calls the Virgin Mary a whore, I'd have $1. Exactly one." So that tells you what type of story this is.
What a great quote.
I'm gonna take this down. I'm gonna take this down. I've got a trailer here. This 45 seconds. Very proud of this trailer. So here's the trailer for The Trial of St. Gabriel. Is that really not playing like that? Hang on. I get it all ready, and then it doesn't.
Only when you need it does it have an issue.
Yeah. Here we go. All right, let's try it again. Experience the Christmas story like it has never been told before, from the perspective of the angels at war. The third heaven is in tumult as Michael and his host war against Prince Lucifer and his rebels. In the midst of the violence, God Almighty has chosen to be born into the world as an innocent and defenseless babe. The Archangel Gabriel has been dispatched to make arrangements for the birth, but with him goes Sataniel, the angel who tortured Job and slew his children many years before. No one knows what torment he has come to wreak upon Judea, but Gabriel is keeping his sword close at hand. The Trial of St. Gabriel, the dark story of the Christmas massacre, written by E.H. Robinson. Get it today. All right, so that's my story.
Nice.
If you're interested, only $4 on Kickstarter right now.
That's an awesome trailer, by the way.
Thank you. I'm really want to be able to do a whole lot more with AI, especially AI video technology. And so I've been keeping a close eye on generative AI technology for almost a year now, and have dived in a little bit, stuck my toe in a little bit. Is it ready? Is it ready? Is it ready? Over the past several months. But then when I needed a trailer for my short story, I said, all right, now it's time to just dive in and see what I can do with generative AI video technology. And that's what I came up with.
That's amazing.
I want to push it even further. I got a lot of things I want to do with it.
Yeah, I bet. I could see that being a lot of hours. I mean, I would spend so much time on it. I'd be afraid to touch it.
Well, I would like to be able to produce something like that in a day. We had a conversation over Thanksgiving. My father was like, "Can't you use AI and produce that in 30 minutes?" And I was like, "No,
No.
I showed him what was going on. It was no. That takes longer than 30 minutes to make, even using generative AI tech.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Well, are you ready to?
I am ready to get into
go
this.
Back to France.
Let's go back. Vive la France! Right.
That's right. So I guess this story starts in the early or the late 18th century, and I think I was thinking maybe we talk initially about some of the technical aspects. What do you think?
I was going to say that with regard to my notes, when I first wrote out my notes, I basically just wrote things down as they came to me.
Okay.
So they're not like in chronological order. I tried to do a little bit of organization before I sat down with this, before this goes, because I was, man, I need to organize this in some way. I didn't necessarily get them all organized. So we're going to have to go by topic here rather than like chronologically through the film or anything like that. So I think you've got several topics on your list that I don't have on mine. So we can just start and we'll just go by topic, and it's what comes up, I think we talk about. That's how I think.
It may be worth it just to tee off, I guess. Out of 10, like where do you stand on it? Like if you had to give it a something out of 10, what was your overall general opinion of the film?
Oh, I mean, it was something like a 3.
Oh, like a 3 out of 10.
Oh yeah, it was not good. Like when I
Okay.
like I think I might have left. Like I'm not a big, and I've probably said this a couple of times, I'm not a big leave the movie kind of person. But there are a few movies where I at least thought about it. And this was one of them.
Wow.
Really. I think I probably would, because I went with my friend, who I don't know if he'll show up in the chat here or not, but if you see Wild Barley, he went with me to see the show, see the film. Then we went to a bar afterwards and had discussed it and had conversations about all other kinds of things and geekdom. It was fantastic. But I sat down, and if I wasn't having to do this review, I might have left.
Oh, wow.
Especially after the what was really the clincher was the divorce scene, followed up immediately by the next scene where he shows up to Josephine again. That's when Wild Barley, I noticed he was like checking his watch. And I looked over at him, and he looked at, he was checking his watch. He looked over at me. I looked over at him. And I was like, yeah, but I got to do this review on Tuesday night, so I need to watch the whole thing. And then as soon as I stood up, like when the movie was over and we stood up, I told him, listen, I think we would just be fantastic at being in Hollywood, because all you have to do is take something really, really interesting and make it boring. Like I could take something really interesting period of history and make it boring. I told him, I bet we could take Caesar's life. Let's do a movie about Caesar. I bet we could make him sound just dreadful. Like we could probably just make Caesar sound like the most dreadfully chewing cardboard kind of person we could. Because I said, it's like we said, all right, hey, let's make a movie about Napoleon. Let's just off the top of your head, let's make a list of all of the most interesting parts of Napoleon's life. And so you and I write down that list. It's like, okay, great. That's a list of things that shall not appear in this movie. And Wild Barley, that was my opening salvo before we'd even left the theater, as we were standing up from our seats and going to the exit. That was my opening salvo to Wild Barley. And he knows how much I love Napoleon.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, oh, I'm so glad you said that, because I was really afraid that I was going to have to break the seal in saying that this was not a good movie.
Oh, wow.
we laughed about that. So, yeah, overall, I am not a fan of this movie.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with Tom McCrad. It sounds like That's how I felt after The Last Jedi. When I came out, I just could not get over it, no matter how many ways I angled and thought and considered. I was just so frustrated with The Last Jedi. Now,
I'm starring other comments, by the way. I'm starring them, so I see other people. So when we come to, I'm seeing things I want to address later. So just because I moved past your comments doesn't mean I'm not. I'm starring some interesting ones to come back to. So I'm watching.
Positive Fandom is really putting an earmark in to talk about certain topics. So we want to make sure we get to that.
Absolutely. Yes, I started that.
Now, I like this film better than you, although I don't think this was a great film. I give it closer to a 6 out of 10. There was a lot that I liked about it. There was a lot that I did not like about it. So I think in the end, I'm slightly favorable toward the film. However, there are certain things, there's certain directorial decisions, storytelling decisions, theme and topic decisions that I absolutely could not understand how they landed on and why they chose those to focus on. But there was other things I thought that this film did excellently. In general terms, and we can go into more detail later, I thought some of the casting was good. I thought some of the casting was okay. I thought the acting overall was generally good. I thought the cinematography was rather incredible. Costume design, incredible. This was filmed in 62 days, which is
incredible.
That's unbelievable. Personally, I was happy to see a historical epic again at the theaters. It seemed like no one was doing that anymore. And then this one came out. I will say I was pretty jacked after seeing the trailer. The trailer.
Well, I was too.
Yeah. The trailer looked historical epic. It really grabbed me. And I feel like what was in the trailer were the parts that I liked the most, except for a couple. There was a few historical inaccuracies in this that we should probably mention here and there. But overall, I thought the film was wrong to focus on Napoleon and Josephine. I think the film succumbed to some of the temptations, which I understand, in the modern day to include the woman's role, in this case, Josephine, her role in history, and to place a bigger spotlight on her. Great. I don't think it was a successful decision in this case. Some stories are not about you. So in this case, I don't think the story was about Josephine. I didn't need her in this that much. I wanted to know about Napoleon. And as a guy, I really appreciate and I'm drawn to great military commanders, specifically ones that are commanders who are considered tactical geniuses, which Napoleon was, if not one of the greatest tactical military leaders of all time. And we didn't really get much of that in this movie. And I thought that was, I think you said it earlier, to not use or that it's a cliche to say it was a missed opportunity. But it was like, why leave that on the table? How could you leave that part out of this man's story? So that said, this was not a documentary. This was a movie. It is fiction. It is meant to entertain and tell a story. Whether that was successful or not is clearly debatable, but it is not a documentary. So I did want to make that distinction as well. It's not meant to be a perfect chronology in terms of perfect historical accuracy.
I want to make a couple points on that. First of all, regarding other, I do want to say that I did watch the trailer before I watched this, and I was really big on the trailer. I watched it several times, and I was like,
yes,
okay, I'm definitely going to see that. I did not watch anything else about the movie on YouTube or read anything about it, nothing, until I went to see it. And I still have not watched anybody else's review or read anybody else's blog or review or anything. I sealed myself off before I went to see it, and I have not watched anything else anybody has said until now. So you're hearing my opinions, or if I'm reading from somebody else's notes, you're hearing from their opinions. But I have not looked at what anybody else is saying about this movie.
Well, and it may be for what's the word? Foreshadowing. But after I saw the trailer, there's that scene where they show Napoleon open fire and hit a pyramid, and I was like, oh, I always thought he hit the Sphinx, like knocked the nose off the Sphinx. So before I saw the movie, I looked that up, and that is true. So the movie is inaccurately depicting him firing at a pyramid. And I did read up. I was like, why would they take something that everyone seems to know? That Napoleon's troops shot off the nose to the Sphinx, an iconic world wonder. This guy, the world wonder intersected with Napoleon. Here's this moment, and the film, the director chooses to change that detail. I think that was crazy. Why not show them? I don't even know. Why would you shift that focus anyway? It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, that was a little precursor onto how even the epic trailer contained the kernel of what was going to be some of the flaws of the film, which was just odd misguidance in the focus. So he did not shoot at a pyramid. He shot the nose off the Sphinx.
Well, then see, that's what. Okay, I got two. I got one other thing to say. Then we'll go to the nose of the Sphinx. The first is that yes, we have been missing something else you said just a moment ago. We have been missing historical epics for a long time. In fact, the Master and Commander was the end of an era. I mean, the Master and Commander came out a long time ago, and I missed that movie when it came out. I watched it years ago, but years after it came out, and that movie kind of flopped, and that kind of ended the era of the historical epics. And now here we are with Napoleon again. So this was a chance to really revitalize the historical epic genre, which I would have loved to have seen. I mean, if this had just been amazing, then we could have revitalized historical epics, and we didn't do that.
Well, I'll tell you, I actually rewatched Master and Commander recently and was stunned by how well it holds up and how brilliantly that was filmed.
It's Star Trek in the Age of Sail.
100%. But we should almost do a table talk on Master and Commander. There's so much good about it. And all that was good about Master and Commander is lacking, I would say, Napoleon. Napoleon feels like a scrapbook. Like you're flipping through a scrapbook and each photo comes to life for about 4 to 6 minutes. And then you flip the page, you get another 4 to 6 minutes. Each self-contained photo, like cinematographic photo, I thought was impressive. I liked it. I actually thought the historical sense of the scenes and the setting and the world building of France at this time was excellent. I just wish they could have done it in a more focused, story-driven manner rather than more of a chaotic, competing storylines with Josephine and Napoleon. Okay. I thought she got way too much screen time, given this is a film that's supposed to be about him. I thought, I'll just say this. So I'm writing about Empress Theodora, and I made a point that when writing, although there are several other famous historical people around her in my story, that this story was going to be focused on her. And so even major characters like Justinian, who are part of the story, come in and come out of the story as they are appropriate. But the story must stay focused on Theodora. Why? Because it's her story. And I feel like that rule was not followed here. The film is called Napoleon. It is his story. And yet there seemed to be this amazing pressure to tell Josephine's story as if it were equally relevant. And it's not.
Okay, let's go to, like I said, this is not chronological at all, but let's talk about what everybody's talking about with the Sphinx. So that's right, because according to classic legend, it was Napoleon's troops who were using the Sphinx for target practice and knocked off its nose. But as people are talking about in the comments, and as I had brought up in my notes, one tale erroneously attributes the destruction of the nose to cannonballs fired by the army of Napoleon Bonaparte. This is considered false, since drawings of the Sphinx by Frederick Louis Norton in 1737 already show the nose missing, predating Napoleon's arrival by 60 years. And James is also talking about that. Candace just supplemented their Persian travel logs from at least 100 years before Napoleon that mention the nose of the Sphinx being gone, and there are drawn diagrams and artist renderings. So it is probably it's a common myth, I think, urban legend, that it's Napoleon.
My point is, if you're a filmmaker and you're going to film this moment, why film an equally false moment that no one's heard of, shooting at a pyramid, versus the image? Like if I saw on screen the image of Napoleon's troops shooting at the Sphinx, my man, it's been manifested. I've seen it now. If you're going to include a false detail, include the one that we've heard of. Don't include a new one that no one's ever heard of. I just think that's an odd swap.
That was the point that I was going to make as well. Regardless, because we want to talk about the historicity of it, but then also storytelling, because we talk about both here. But even if it's not historically true, that whether or not it was Napoleon's troops who shot off the nose, it's so ingrained in us,
right?
That you could have, if you didn't show it at all, then you would have just skipped it. But since you're going to show the pyramids being hit, everyone is going to think it wasn't the pyramids, it was the Sphinx. So why would you have this scene where the pyramids get hit, that whether it's true or not, everyone's going to think, no, wait a minute, he hit the Sphinx. That was a weird choice. I don't think you can put that in there. Now, that what I think was happening here that was not developed in the movie, but it seemed to be something that was supposed to be out there, was that Napoleon thought that his artillery officers were not capable enough, and that's what lost him the war. Because later, at the very end, he talks about this is all just trigonometry. Does he say geometry or trigonometry? I can't remember it more.
I think geometry.
He says geometry. This is all geometry. And so I think it's supposed to be comical when Napoleon's artillery is supposed to fire at the Egyptian army, and they all miss hilariously bad and hit the pyramids instead. So I think that's so when we hear that Napoleon's artillery can't get their geometry right, I think that's supposed to be a callback that they're so bad shots that they missed the entire Egyptian army and hit the pyramids.
But that wasn't clear. But that wasn't what they were doing. They almost just threw it in there. Just as this great image of, French troops opening firing a cannon.
And they all hit the pyramids.
Right. So, I don't know,
in retrospect, I think they were supposed to have been idiots and missed because they don't know their geometry. I think.
But if that's what you're trying to prove, then, or if that's your story, or if that's part of the story, then you got to drive that home. You can't just throw something in there. And again, it's such a key detail to change. It's like, if I'm going to show Washington cutting down a cherry tree, and then at the last second, I'm like, let's change it to an orange tree. It's like, why? Why would you do that?
Whether or not that's a historical thing or not, you can't all of a sudden put a scene of George Washington hacking down an orange tree, because everybody will go, wait a minute.
But that's the level that's what I'm saying. You change the critical detail. Whether it was true or not doesn't even matter in this sense. If you're going to include it, don't change the detail that matters.
And it takes everybody out of the movie, because that's what everybody thinks at that scene. They leave the movie at that scene.
Exactly.
And that's why it's one of the first things we're talking about, right?
Right. Totally.
One of the first things we're talking about.
Well, because Napoleon, he's almost like mythical, right? In Western history, we've all heard about him. We've all heard these stories. We've all seen the great oil paintings. So when you bring something like this to life, I think that as a filmmaker, you have this opportunity to manifest this myth. And they just completely swing and missed on that one, in my opinion.
James says Candace took that scene as a show of power to prevent a battle. He was attacking their spirit by attacking the pyramids. Maybe I think that's a legitimate approach to that. But I was just trying but Napoleon has this thing about, oh man, my artillery just couldn't get their geometry together. And so I was trying to, in retrospect from that comment, try to align, because I didn't really understand what happened in that scene. This is when I was watching it. That's only my interpretation of that scene in retrospect, because otherwise that line about my artillery can't get their geometry together, like, first of all, it has very little anchor anyway. But if that isn't what they were going with the pyramids, it would have been no anchor. I don't know.
Well, the reason I wanted to lead with that, or at least start with that in terms of like diving into a specific part of the movie, is it just shows the range there of error that's possible in this film. There is a range that they got right, and then it goes all the way down to things that they got wrong for odd reasons that I can't quite explain.
Even this scene that goes on with him and the mummy, which I think is Ramsey's mummy or something.
Oh,
like that.
yeah.
That when you look back and this was a long movie anyway. Now, not that I don't have in principle a problem with long movies, 2 hours and 38 minutes. If it's well spent, I don't have a problem with that. But when you're trying to look at, which we're going to talk about, I know what this movie was about, what its theme was, and things like that. When I think back at like Napoleon, like a lot of these scenes take a long time. Napoleon walking, looking at this mummy standing up on a body, like that's some time. And I'm thinking, what are we getting across? What's the point of Napoleon standing here with this mummy? And I still don't even know what that point was as far as, so I'm like, this shouldn't even be in this movie, maybe.
Well, typically when you show one historical figure looking at the remains of another, it's almost like they're wondering if their legacy is gonna last. But is that necessary for this? Is that the way to do it?
Well, if that was the purpose of the movie, if the purpose of the movie, like you could say the theme of this movie is that even great men must confront death. Like, I don't think that was the theme of this movie.
Not at all.
Okay,
they never.
If it was, then having Napoleon examine the mummy of the Egyptian pharaoh early on would be significant, and it would be driving home the theme. But because it's not the theme of the movie, what are we doing?
Right. Again, if it feels to me like a scrapbook. Here's Napoleon looking at a mummy. Here's a photo of it. Let's film that. Where they're almost, like in your trailer, or what the AI can generate a slightly moving photograph in a sense, right? That's what the AI can generate.
Wait, the moving picture, yeah.
Right. I saw like this 1920s Star Wars thing I think everybody has seen. So in a way, I feel like Napoleon was a very advanced version of that. Like, here's a photograph that I have in my head. Let's film a scene where this moves around. Maybe there's dialogue in it. So that's why I feel like it's more like a scrapbook than a story. So Heath, do you want to talk about real quick, if you don't mind, I'll just mention the box office. It did better than
before you do that, let me go to a super chat just real quick. So there we go. So I'll go to James, because James will start off with a $10 super chat. Thank you, James. $10. I had 3 major issues with this film. Oh, I got to find the third issue. I had 3 major issues with this film. 1, the unbearable amount of shoe leather. I don't need to see every time someone pulls up in a driveway in a carriage. 2, the overall lack of focus. Uh-oh. Okay, hang on. Wait a minute. Let me find the continuation.
I like how number 1 deals with shoe leather, because that we don't talk enough about shoe leather.
Lack of overall focus, because 3, Napoleon did not express a desire for the entire film. He was without yearning. Oh, I think that's completely true.
Yep.
Like,
man. Very subdued.
Oh, man. Dreadfully so.
My problem that happens a lot with certain depictions of historical characters. In fact, it happened with Ahsoka, where the writer likes the character so much that they're so afraid to get it wrong that they think simply putting the character on screen is enough to fascinate you. And that is fascinating for about 10 seconds. After that, when I'm watching a show or a movie, I want to understand this character. Otherwise, why am I paying for the ticket? And I felt that they played it way too safe with Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal of Napoleon.
Tom McGrath asks, how did my family like the film? Well, sadly, I was trying to get a bunch of family members to go with me, and I couldn't. So that was actually I wanted them to go, so I went with Wild Barley, my friend. I mean, that wasn't I tried to get family to go with me, but I invited them, but they didn't go. So even my uncle, who was a novelist and Napoleonic scholar, did not go with me. For as far as the Napoleonic enthusiasts go, he's one of them, the novelist and Napoleonic scholar. Another uncle of mine who went through the Napoleonic fascination phase has sadly passed away. And then there's me on this next on the next rung of the family tree. And I actually asked my brother if I could take my nephew, my oldest, not my oldest nephew, but my brother's oldest son, to go and see the movie, because he's just at the right age to become obsessed with Napoleon. And my brother said, no, I don't think he's quite ready for this yet. And so he didn't go. And I was, in retrospect, so glad that he didn't go, because I said, all right, well, you're going to do this the old fashioned way. I'm going to have to bring over History Channel documentaries on VHS tapes, old library books, and war game miniatures in order to get him obsessed with Napoleon. And actually, that will be a better way than having him watch this movie. So I was glad that he didn't go.
Yeah. Well, I figure one thing that's worth discussing, we don't have to belabor it, but the casting choices.
Do you want to go to this is box office? I interrupted.
Oh, yeah, box office.
Doing box office. You want to do box
right.
office?
So the film has done better than expected, which isn't saying too much because it did finish. What's interesting is that it beat Disney's Wish, which I don't know if that says much about Napoleon or just how bad Wish is. But the movie so far has made about $34 million as of today, or as of Monday. $34 million domestically and about $80 million globally. Overseas, it finished. The United Kingdom was your biggest supporter of the film, followed by France. So it did slightly better than projected there as well. So it's doing okay. The problem, okay, and as far as critical reception goes, I did take a look before this stream. It's at 60% on Rotten Tomatoes with critics, which means the absolute minimum to be considered certified fresh. And with fans, it's almost identical, 59% with fans. So it's actually not considered certified fresh with fans. On Metacritic, 6.4 out of 10 with critics and 4.6 out of 10 for fans. On IMDb, it is also 6.7. So it's not moving past that breakaway threshold of 6.5. So it's doing okay at the box office early on. It's doing okay in terms of critical and fan reception. So I think, to your point, Heath, if this was the moment for the big historical epic to make a breakout, I think it failed to leave orbit.
All right. You want to go casting next? I didn't have notes on the box office. I have not maintained that at all. So you want to go casting next?
Yeah, I figure it's worth talking about. I liked Joaquin Phoenix as Napoleon in terms of his appearance. I feel like he looked the part. And I think I just saw something in the chat. Someone said it might have been James Bacon, that Joaquin didn't get his character until like just a couple days before filming. That's not something you want to hear your lead actor say in a historical epic. You would like to have that actor completely immersed in this character, embodying Napoleon. I will say this. My first knee-jerk bad reaction to this film occurred right away. And there's only so much you could do about this. But it was heavily Americanized. I'm like, there's Napoleon. Then he's like, hey, how are you doing? And I was like, that's a shame.
Okay.
Not even like French actors. They were like British actors and American actors. And I was like, man, at least have a French actor who sounds like they have a French accent,
Okay. Got so many things to think about, so many things to talk about. Let me just go off that immediately, because I did say that as well when I was talking to Wild Barley about this I was like, why don't we have French accents? Why aren't they speaking with a French? I mean, they're not speaking French. I understand. Why aren't they speaking with French accents? I said that as well. Now, Wild Barley said that's because that is a Ridley Scott thing. He says that Ridley Scott does not like to have that. And I was like, oh, okay. So we're thinking about that as far as Ridley Scott cinematography and filmography rather, then that makes sense that, okay, let's not have bad French accents. But I was expecting the French to at least speak with French accents. And occasionally they would say words in French ways. It stuck out to me when they would say words, when they were speaking in English accents, like American accents throughout most of it. And then they would occasionally hit a French pronounced word. And that's when it was, and like one of them was Talleyrand.
Yeah.
That if you otherwise have American accents throughout this film, then say Talleyrand.
Right.
Because that's how we would say his name. And then I think I would have just glossed over that, because everything is that. But but I would have said we got to make a call here. We've got to. Which way are we going here? We can't all of a sudden do a French pronunciation of a name in an otherwise American accented film. It's got to be one or the other. So that's why that stuck out to me.
A great example of a film that doesn't go purist, because, you know, it's hard to be a purist, like The Passion of the Christ. They actually speak in Aramaic. And so this film's not going to do that. But a good example of a film that uses the wrong accents in a way that works is Amadeus. The film director, Milos Forman, decided that the Germans, as portrayed in the film, were going to have American accents, like Tom Hulce and Jeffrey Jones, who played the Emperor. They all had American accents. But all of the Italians were going to have British accents. So although the accents don't line up to the historical record, there was a sense of consistency. And at some point, you're into the film and you accept this reality. In Napoleon, you've got Americans and British. And I thought it was very disorienting to have British there because the British are a part of this story. So, you know, again, I could see maybe if you want to cast Joaquin Phoenix and he's going to speak in an American accent, but then surround him with French accents, just to keep that you're in France. You know, I just thought that you have to have some strategy there. And his strategy was, who cares? British, American, we're all French here. And I thought that broke the illusion multiple times for me.
I've got things to say about casting, but we got off on accents. But did you have more to say?
Well, but that's
casting?
Part of it because you're casting an American.
It's part of it. I'm just saying we want to go back to casting in general.
So, and to me, I thought it was especially egregious because Joaquin Phoenix looked so much the part. I thought he looked good as Napoleon. And one of the other things I think this film did excel at was the costume design. I thought that the way that the characters were portrayed, the costumes were excellent. So you have this excellent, authentic look to the characters. And now they're speaking in a muddle of British and American accents. So it seemed to drive a greater, it seemed to drive that point home for me even more. You know, so anyway, that was one issue. I guess the next, what did you think about Joaquin? Did you think that he was a good choice?
Too old.
Well, they should have de-aged him.
Yeah. Okay. So as far as that goes, I would say, let me say about, what would you say? Okay. The best part. Okay. So before I go to that, you brought up things you like. And so when Wild Barley and I were talking, we're like, what was the best part of this? I will tell you the best part of this. And it was the costume design. And specifically, I'm talking about Napoleon in the gray trench coat and his hat. I would say if my favorite part of the movie, I said, what was the best part of that movie to me, is that there were at least some fleeting scenes where you are looking at a Napoleonic encampment, battle encampment, looking over things, especially when Napoleon, Emperor of the French, is wearing his iconic just gray trench coat with his hat, you know, that's all he's wearing. And there's so many paintings. And that's such an iconic look for Napoleon. And so when you saw that in certain scenes, I was like, that looks like Napoleon. So that was my favorite part of the movie, when I had those scenes and those visuals.
I would say also in terms of like a painting coming to life, when he crowned himself emperor, the costume that he had worn there,
the costume was right there. Yes.
What's that?
The costume was right there. The scene sucked, I thought.
But I'm not talking about the scene. And I agree with you.
The costuming was right. The costuming was dead on.
Dead on. It looked like the oil painting was living in front of me. I had seen that oil painting a million times. So when I was watching him move around in that, I was like, holy shit, they nailed that look.
They got them.
So I thought he was good in that sense. He looked like Napoleon. I thought the acting was pretty blasé and subdued and uninteresting, uninspired. I thought it was a minimum conservative, safe effort at not doing too much in order to not screw it up. So I don't think he ruined Napoleon in his portrayal, but he certainly didn't elevate his portrayal to anything that'll be very memorable. Not on his behalf, anyway. I think he'll be memorable visually. I guess the next discussion point as far as casting.
As far as because I've still got casting things, but go ahead.
I'm still talking about casting.
Okay, still go ahead with casting.
Vanessa Kirby, who plays Josephine. It was weird. I was like, where do I know her from? She plays the White Widow in the Mission Impossible franchise, the more recent ones. So she's not a, I think she's just starting to get to be top tier, I guess you could say. I thought she was, so this is interesting. I don't usually have this criticism. I thought she was a bad casting choice. I did not like that. She did not look like a woman from France. She did not look like the character she was portraying. I don't know what, but her look clashed with me almost the entire film. That said, I thought her acting performance was pretty amazing. She may have had the best acting performance in the film, even though I thought she was hopelessly miscast, which I know it's a bizarre way to see it. She carried some scenes almost completely by herself. But I don't know why they would. I don't know what it was, but she kind of turned me off. She looked too American or something, too Anglo. I don't know what it was, but she never struck me as Josephine.
I resisted. I was holding out for this movie. Like when I watched the trailer, I really liked it, and I was holding out for it. But one of the criticisms that I received, such as from my uncle and from other people, was that Joaquin Phoenix is too old. And I agree with that. Before I saw this movie, I was holding out because I wasn't sure if they were going to try to do all of Napoleon's life. Like I said, I had just seen the trailer. And then I was going to go in fresh to the movie. And I was like, well, maybe we're not doing all of Napoleon's life. Or maybe if they do earlier scenes, they're going to de-age him or something like that. So I was holding out. In fact, I was in text messages. I was like, well, we'll just see. Maybe they'll be de-aging. Maybe this isn't all of Napoleon's life. Because I do agree that, oh, hey, Brett. Because I do agree that I'm starring people's comments as they're going by. So just because we haven't gotten to them, if you got something to say, make sure you put it in the comments. I'm starring things to get to. But so I was defending this potential choice because I do like Joaquin Phoenix as an older Napoleon. Okay, I do think that he carried that as an older Napoleon during the 100 Days campaign.
Right.
Okay. That did not work at all with what they were trying to tell. If they were going to try to do this entire Napoleon's arc, they needed a young man to play Napoleon badly. So you could have had multiple actors play Napoleon. I'm not sure I would have taken this approach if I were making the film. But if you were going to try to do all of Napoleon's life, or at least 22 years of Napoleon's life in one 2-hour and 38-minute film, I might have tried having multiple actors play him and then had Joaquin Phoenix play him during the 100 days. I mean, do something like where he puts his hat on down as a young man and then comes up and he's Joaquin Phoenix. Do something like that because, man, James is saying he was world-weary, 49-year-old Napoleon the entire film. I actually think that Joaquin Phoenix was older than, I think I saw this today, but he's either Napoleon's age when he died or just older than Napoleon's when he died when Joaquin Phoenix started shooting this film. This was not what you should have done. I mean, at what are my ages here? Where did I go? Like Napoleon was only 24 at Toulon. Like Joaquin Phoenix playing a 24-year-old. And I've got a lot more to say about that as what this movie should have been telling as far as its theme goes. But to have like 49-year-old, 40, whatever, however old he is, trying to play a vital, just amazing young, 24-year-old at Toulon. Dumb. Did not work. did
Well,
not.
in fact, I thought Toulon is where it looks very obvious that they had a problem with his age, because as a storyteller, you have to find out what are some of the most compelling aspects of the story. So if you have a 24-year-old man, okay, when I look at a 24-year-old guy now, I'm like, oh man, this guy looks young, clean face, he's 24 years old, there's a certain charisma to a young man. There's a certain energy and vitality to a young man, all of which Joaquin Phoenix did not have, by the way. That vitality, that revolutionary spirit, that youth and vibrancy, that's part of that story. That's something you're trying to capture and depict on that screen. If you I'm imagining in my head right now a young 24-year-old Napoleon having just taken Toulon, being celebrated by all his men. That says something. This guy's up and coming. He's a genius for his age. When you show instead a guy with long hair, and it didn't even look good, that long hair, brooding on a horse, and he looks like he's 40-something, you completely missed conveyance of this historical character and what it would have been and what it would have looked like, and that vibrancy, that revolutionary spirit, all of that was lacking in that Toulon sequence, based solely on the age and appearance of the actor.
Almost everyone was portrayed too old.
Oh, Positive Fandom just said, could Timothée Chalamet played a young Napoleon? Possibly, yeah. He is French too, very young, so he's about that age. That would have been an interesting choice.
God. I was like, wait, who was that? I had to remind myself. I'm sorry.
Paul Atreides from Dune. He's Wonka coming up.
Paul Atreides.
And by the way, he looks like he's going to be great in that. That's an interesting choice, Positive Fandom, because he's the right age and he's the right ethnicity.
I think yeah. I mean, look, yeah, he probably could have pulled it off. That would have been.
Think about that for a second. Think about the scene after Napoleon takes Toulon in his military uniform with that young 24-year-old, fresh face, vibrant, young, successful, with all of his men surrounding him and cheering him up. I mean, that takes on a whole different meaning when you witness that versus a 40-year-old man who's pretending to be a cannon artillery director. What was his? So anyway, well, I think you're right. I think Napoleon late in life, Joaquin is a near perfect match. But
if he had played him at the end of during the 100 Days campaign, I would have been like, all right, let's go. That's fine. Let's do it. He cannot play him as a young man. It did not work.
And to the same point, if you're trying to tell the story of a wise veteran, tactical genius, then you would cast someone like Joaquin Phoenix, who someone like Timothée Chalamet won't be able to convey that, at least not yet. So it's actually an interesting theory that you said maybe split up the actors. I know I'm not a big fan of that either, but in some cases it could work.
I'm not sure that is I'm not sure that's what I would have done. I'm just saying that would have been an option you could have gone that I think would have been better than what we got.
Again, I hate to bring it up again, but Amadeus is a great example where they used an older actor, and then they made him old for the old scenes. And then every time there was a flashback, he was young again, and it was flawless. And by the way, that makeup that they did in 1984 in Amadeus for Salieri is still incredible to this day. But that was another option they could have done. They could have tried to find a younger actor and then age him with makeup, or find Joaquin and de-age him for the younger scenes, or just pick a different actor altogether. So anyway,
Wild Barley's notes from Wild Barley also said, he said, the cast was nearly universally too old, although they provided strong performances at times, despite a script bereft of drama. But then he also says, Wellington is another problem with this. Wild Barley said Wellington could have been replaced with a red cardboard sign that said stiff upper lip, and nothing would have been changed about any scene that he was in. No kidding. When I think of, so I brought this up, this is the Duke of Wellington just after Waterloo. The Duke of, so he's 46 right here. I mean, this is his his portrait here, to be worn from 1915 by Knights of the Grand Cross. So I mean, you're looking at Wellington at the time of Waterloo, and they cast this old guy who has no personality, no charisma. I mean, Napoleon didn't either. But I mean, just constantly, again, let's have someone with an old guy with no charisma and no personality. That's probably also direction, because the director could have said, hey, like, you could have some spunk here, and some excitement and some charisma, and it wasn't it. But when I think of the Duke of Wellington, I think of this portrait. And then what you got at the Battle of Waterloo was horrific.
Yeah, I think in history, when you're actually going to portray some of the great historical face-offs, this is one of them. The Duke of Wellington versus Napoleon in the Battle of Waterloo. It would have been much more compelling to show a dynamic, there's something about an energetic old warrior who's got the self-control, the discipline and experience that someone like Wellington had. I agree. I think they went with a more of a like a ship commander rather than a field like a field marshal. Someone who's a little bit more brooding and gruff rather than dynamic and vigorous on the field of war.
I'll take that.
Yeah, he was played by Rupert Everett.
Rupert Everett. Okay, so yes, which there's nothing wrong with Rupert Everett.
Right, I know, but you're playing Wellington.
Rupert Everett is fine. I'm just saying that when I looked at Rupert Everett as the Duke of Wellington in this movie, after a long line of people being too old and having no charisma, we got it again. Like, is that could have been the direct, as far as the no charisma part, that's probably the directing. Like, again, like we talked about, like in Ahsoka, when everybody is like stoic and just, looking around. I felt like we're experiencing that again. That, okay, like the director, like Ridley Scott, is going, okay, everybody be like, uninteresting, be like, aloof, uninteresting, and act like you're above it all, and it's just.
Well, I think it was better than Ahsoka. Ahsoka was startlingly stoic and dead in terms of the acting portrayals. This was a step up, but that's not saying much. Again, I thought Vanessa Kirby actually did give us some range. There was the scene during the divorce when she was asked to read off the divorce decree, and she was kind of laughing and very resistant and almost like I thought that was a very good acting performance by her, despite her, I thought, being hopelessly miscast. I still thought she delivered some of the best acting in the movie.
Well, now regarding the cast, actually, Wild Barley had notes on that. So regarding the influence of COVID on this, Wild Barley looked this up.
Oh.
And so he says that some scenes, Wild Barley brought this up like immediately after the discussion. Or excuse me, immediately in the discussion after having watched the movie. It wasn't his first thing. I'll bring that up in a moment, so we'll probably talk about it again. But he says, Wild Barley says, some scenes were filmed during pandemic protocols, and they suffer from austerity of that pared back to person only style scene. They suffer from the austerity of that pared back two person only scene style. So there were a lot of scenes with only two people in it, and that was apparently because of COVID protocols. How do we shoot this movie? We can only have two people on the screen. So there are a lot of scenes, especially in retrospect. Wild Barley picked up on it immediately. There's a lot of these scenes that have two people in it because it's under COVID protocols. So that's it. And he says the original Josephine actress backed out weeks before filming because of the issues related to pandemic scheduling restrictions, further raising the specter of the pandemic's influence. So he's got that. So there could have been another Josephine, but because of pandemic issues and scheduling and protocols and all that.
Do we know who the other actress was going to be? Who was going to play Josephine?
Let's see if we can find that. Somebody in the comments.
I'd be very curious. Again, I thought the actress did a great job acting, Vanessa Kirby, but I did not like her as the cast choice. And she was the only one I felt that really attempted to give a performance. Now, all that said, I wasn't very happy with the portrayal of her anyway. Like they kept putting her in there, and I was like, are you trying to like? So you're forcing us to like follow a little bit of Josephine here, but is she supposed to be heroic? Is she supposed to be a strong woman? Because I didn't get any of that either. I didn't really know where they were going with her character. She seemed to be like they try to introduce her like she's this strong, sexually liberated woman who's, a perfect match for Napoleon. And then they just kind of got off of that. And then there's a scene where during that divorce scene where Napoleon cracks her one, which is historically inaccurate. And I just thought that was weird. You're trying to tell a love story on some muddled level about Josephine and Napoleon, and you add physical abuse into it, which didn't actually occur. So I don't know. I thought that was another strange inclusion that shouldn't have been there. And it seemed to clash with what they were doing.
Positive Fandom says the divorce was the only intimate scene between Napoleon and Josephine that had any passion. But like that's when I probably would have left, because this movie had so much tell don't show in it. I mean, so much tell don't show, because they were trying to cover so much ground. It seems like one way that you could do that, like if you have a lot of ground to cover, one way that you could do that is by narration. And so the idea of the letters are going to narrate something. If you're going to cover a lot of ground, it's like, okay, then occasionally we're going to have to jump scenes, and we have some way to bridge this. We're going to have a narration. Letters between Napoleon and Josephine might do it. Okay, if you got to go that route, then I'm potentially okay with that. But there was so much just telling you things, and nowhere was it more apparent between the divorce scene and the immediate scene following. That's when I was like, oh my God, you have got to stop. Because you have this divorce scene between Napoleon and Josephine. And then you needed to go someplace else with this movie. Like you needed to show Napoleon without Josephine and whatever. But in this, there is the divorce scene. And then immediately the next scene is Napoleon driving up in a carriage to go and see Josephine. And what does he say? He says, "I've missed you." I'm like, don't have Napoleon show up the very next scene after the divorce and say, "Oh, I've missed you." Go to battle scenes, go to him on campaign, go to the politics, and show me Napoleon missing Josephine. That's what this movie should have. But the scene of the divorce and then immediately coming back to Josephine, you go, "Oh, I missed you," was inexcusable to me.
Well, and then we're probably straying into the topic that Positive Fandom earmarked early on. I'm always intrigued by sex scenes with historical figures, right? It's always a risk, because you have this like historical figure, this sort of mythical character you have in your head, and then here we are, we're going to depict them, banging it out in a scene here. And this movie continues the tradition of like historical figures in bad sex scenes. And I don't know why no one can get this right. Positive Fandom referred to it as the jackhammer,
right? Yeah. Yes.
I mean, it was just the most like passionless, mechanical, like not even a good position. Like it just seemed like two horses mounting in a stable. It was nothing to it, man.
Yeah, that was bad, because it's not like one direction you could have gone with this movie, and I'm going to talk about several different directions later, but since we're on this subject, is you could have done a love story. If you say, hey, we're going to tell a story about Napoleon and Josephine, great romance, great lovers of history. I mean, I think Caesar and Cleopatra, oh my God, Samson and Delilah, Napoleon and Josephine are on that list. So I'm not saying that if I had money to make a Napoleon movie that I would have made it a love story, but you could have. Like one approach to this would have been a love story between Napoleon and Josephine. Oh yeah, and as you mentioned, Napoleon. Yeah, Napoleon and Josephine in this movie get a lot of screen time. Josephine gets a lot of screen time. And yet I didn't feel like this was a love story between Napoleon and
if you're gonna try to include romance and love as part of your dynamic in the film, you have to do two things. One, the male character has to be appealing to women, and the female character should be appealing to men in general.
Anthony and Cleopatra. I mean,
yeah,
Caesar was on the Nile with Cleopatra. And then,
right.
I mean, this whole thing, right? Yes.
So you're modeling basically apex male female characters in a historical setting. So we want to see what apex male and apex female do. How does this courtship work? How does this play out? So you would like to see a Napoleon who has actual male charm, actual seductive abilities, something that is intriguing, commanding, romantic, something appealing about him, so that when you're watching him as a man, you're like, oh man, this guy's good. And if a woman's watching, you'd like her to be like, okay, maybe that would work. And then on the other side, for the woman, like when I was watching Josephine, I never felt particularly attracted to her, or I never found her to be particularly seductive or sexy, or even that strong. Like to me, I thought she was portrayed very neutral to like here's a chick who just got there. You know, she was the chick in the right spot at the right time and got this guy, and he just fell for her. So he was persistent as portrayed in the film as wanting her, but I never saw or bought into why when I was watching either. So I felt like they missed, if they were going to go with this love story, which they clearly attempted to, they didn't do anything that shows me two human beings that are interested in each other and how they would act and why I would be interested in this at all. You know what I'm saying? Like you want both to be able to be good respectively. You'd like to see a girl with good game, a guy with good game. You'd like to see that little dance play out at this high level in a historical context. I mean, and think of the scenes you have. You have like French palaces, emperor, empress bedchambers. You have these great settings for high-level romance scenes, and you get the jackhammer sequence instead.
And you get...
Yeah, I never understood that. That was goofy.
What was that?
I guess some tick, some like... to me, it came across as like a baby wanting to suckle.
I know. Alan, right. So Napoleon was a field officer. Was an artillery officer.
Yes.
Right. Which is that Napoleon used his artillery very well historically. He also invented army rations with bottled peas. Yep. I remember. Oh, I remember that as well. Yes. He was a great field general, and he was an artillerist. And that's, he was called the little corporal because it was the corporals, the artillery corporals, who were supposed to be sighting the guns. And so during the Italian campaign, which, by the way, I watched about 6 hours of documentary on the Italian campaign before watching this movie. And as Wild Barley said, talk about studying for something that's not on the final. Yeah, no kidding. I was like, before I watch this movie, I really need to brush up on Napoleon's Italian campaign. So I took a deep dive into the history of Napoleon in Italy. And boy, that wasn't even something that was in this movie.
Nope.
But that's when he got the nickname the Little Corporal, because he was there sighting artillery pieces, even though he was in command of the army.
Well, let me say this. So Napoleon is considered a military genius. And I think Alan was just talking about what made him a genius. One of it was his ability to move cannons and his ability to find angles on bodies of army. So if there's a column moving in, he gets this flank, hits them, knocks them out, moves his cannons. And by supplying rations, he was able to keep a healthy, strong army for longer. So did you get any of that watching Napoleon?
No.
That he was a military artillery genius?
No, I did not. Of course, he developed the corps system, which is a way to organize the army. Each corps was an army in miniature. Dispersal of the corps. An army marches on its stomach, living off the land, march to the sound of the guns. None of that was in this movie.
Well, they did have some comment There was one comment where he said that, but none of that. I don't think any of that was actually portrayed or conveyed.
Most of Napoleon's engagement with the artillery was this.
Oh yeah, that was.
It's time for Napoleon and artillery. What does Napoleon do with artillery? God.
Yeah. Well, so remember the movie? What I would have loved, and I'm waiting for this to happen one day in a movie, where you have, and you've got Napoleon here, so you've got a character that should be compelling on screen. I would like to see, and I'm dying, if I can ever get there one day, I'll make this myself. Maybe in my Byzantine story on Belisarius, but he's also one of the top military minds of all time. But anyway, show me what a commander sees. I want to see a commander on a ridge, look at the land, look at the column, look at the defenses, and then, like in the movie A Beautiful Mind, show me the algebra or the algorithms of his show the angles that he sees, what he's imagining, how he's moving pieces in his head. And then as the battle actually commences and he's still processing this, show me visually, superimpose what he wants to do and what he thinks he's going to do, and then show him carry it out, make the calls, open fire, and dice up these armies right there on the battlefield. Show me that, because that would make everybody sit there wide-eyed and be like, oh, this is what a general sees. Not just a general, Napoleon. He knows. He's a genius. Like, he knows how to cut up this army using geometry, using those guns and those guns and those guys and those guys and that cavalry, and then the army's decimated. Show me that. Show me the beautiful mind moment on a battlefield. So anyway, they completely didn't do that.
Well, they completely did not do that.
They toned down his military genius to the point of it being assumed, I would say. They just assumed that you knew he was a military genius. Here's a couple shots of cannons opening fire. Here's a couple shots of him saying fire. And here's a couple shots of the enemy being blown up. Not a lot of dynamism they were good battle scenes.
No, I don't even think that.
Yeah, they were good battle scenes, but they did not show me his military genius. And I thought, anyone can do a battle scene if you have this budget, but you've got Napoleon. Show me he's a military genius.
Well, my second note was that as far as the battle scenes went, I went, what happened here? Did he shoot the whole movie and then realize, oh my God, I've spent all my money and not have enough budget to do a battle? Because I thought the battle scenes were terrible. I thought they had no interest. I thought they had no scope. When you think about a Napoleonic battle,
yeah.
I think about large and a lot of scope. And you're fighting over this town and that town over here. Now that town down here, and people are circling around to this river, and we're building pontoon bridges across this river. We've got a lot of scope. And there was no scope in this movie at all. This was the smallest way you could possibly depict a Napoleonic battle, in my opinion. It's, oh, look, they're down there. This is Austerlitz. It's Austerlitz, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
And they're just down there, and we're going to hit them with artillery. And there's a cavalry charge. That's Austerlitz. That's no scope at all for what a Napoleonic battle was.
So to reinforce now, I thought some of the battle scenes were good. However, to your point, you're right. It was, I call that tactical prepping. So like in Star Wars, one of the things that Star Wars does very well is they give you some tactical overview of what the battle is going to be, what the idea is, what the strategy is, what are the physical constraints we're dealing with. And then you watch them go off and attack the Death Star or try to stop the walkers. This movie skipped that. They didn't give you a good tactical overview of what was at stake, how this battle was going to play out.
Right. You're completely right. Yes, and I got something to say about that. I got more to say about that. Brianna said that when I was talking to her today, that she said that one of the things she doesn't like about Ridley Scott is that the way he shoots battles. And I was thinking about this. Is this something like is this actually a Ridley Scott problem? So I was looking at Ridley Scott filmography, and I was some of my favorite movies are Ridley Scott movies. I like Gladiator.
Mm-hmm.
But come to think of it, Gladiator's opening battle is actually very similar to Austerlitz in a very bad way. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But you're right. Now that I'm drawing, I was like, I don't really think of the great battle scenes when I think about Gladiator, but it does open with a battle scene. But come to think of it, that opening battle scene in Gladiator is shot a lot like the battles in Napoleon. And that's exactly what Brianna says she does not like about him as a director, that he gets these battles very wrong. I didn't feel that way about Kingdom of Heaven. I really like the Kingdom of Heaven. I accept, so I didn't like have a massive problem with the battles in Kingdom of Heaven. I enjoyed that movie. Obviously, we loved Black Hawk Down. We talked about that movie specifically. So that's one of my favorite movies of all time. But man, I really felt when we were here with this battle. So it may be a Ridley Scott thing that he's like, I'm not going to have any scope. Maybe I'm not spending the money. There's no budget. I'm not going to have the scope. That it did not work here. Jappard says, would a map scene make sense? Yes, absolutely. If I were making this movie and we're talking about battle scenes in Napoleon, you would be looking at maps a lot. The only time I remember that you were looking at a map in this movie was when they were standing on this, and you didn't actually get a whole bunch of even thought about this, but he goes, the Prussians are over here, tap, tap. The British are over here, tap, tap, and we're going to fight them here at Waterloo. He puts this like cane or stick down on Waterloo. And that's the only time that you're on a map. That does not work for a Napoleonic battle when you're trying to convey this. You would have been looking at the map a lot. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
You would have been.
I think you're right.
Map a lot, and you would have been telling a narrative with the battles. And I will tell you a movie that I was thinking about that did this very well. That I would have drawn from had I been a director, and that was Gettysburg. Have you seen Gettysburg?
Yes.
When you're watching Gettysburg, Gettysburg is a big battle. There's a lot of different things going on the whole battle, and that movie communicates that to you. We're here on this ridge. We're here at the center. We're here on Little Round Top. All these different things. You're here. I would have done the exact same thing here with Napoleon. You would, before the battle, you would have known this village, this corps going this way, this division going here, this here. We've got to hold this. You guys are going to try to ford this river and go this way. There would have been things up on the screen that said, 3 p.m., village of whatever, Messina's corps, to let you know where you are and that meaning. And we got none of that.
Right. So
upset.
So in good battle movies, you see a lot of navigating the terrain. Because that's just a harsh fact and reality of infantry warfare, even with cavalry, with cannons, with moving cannons, with moving infantry. So, for example, Austerlitz is probably considered Napoleon's crowning achievement in terms of his ability to defeat a larger force. So I just grabbed one of, and a lot of us guys read these books when we're kids, where it shows you the battlefield.
I'll solo you. Bring that up. I'll solo you. Yeah.
So there's Austerlitz, right? And this is showing you the terrain because the terrain is very important. And it's showing you kind of how it was laid out. And that's page 1. Page 2 goes in and shows you the topography up here. I don't know if you can see that. But it shows you the terrain and topography there as well. That's page 2, or that was 1 and 2, and now 3 and 4. Here's another page. Austerlitz developed. This is like halfway through the battle. So there's a lot going on, and that's pages 5 and 6. And then here, pages 7 and 8, all of which depict different aspects of Austerlitz. And then it gets into Waterloo, which is a whole separate map. But my whole point is that terrain is very important. I remember when I was watching, to your point earlier, that the scope was missing. They just kind of showed people coming out on the flank. Braveheart did a better job of showing a little bit of tactical thinking with William Wallace when he's like, let's make spears. He told you they soaked the field with oil, then they fired the arrows. You got a sense of what was coming, and now we had to go through it and see if it worked. There's that scene where the English cavalry is charging in, and I'll never forget, this was 1995, I think, Braveheart came out. you see the cavalry coming up and you see them come over this ridge and come down. And I remember being like, oh, shit. Like, you got to navigate that terrain on a horse with all these other guys and stay in formation. Those moments in a film bring the reality of what it is to coordinate men with these kinds of numbers. It brings it into focus. And it always makes it startling and dramatic and amazing to me, and to where I'm so engaged in the battle taking place. This, I thought visually was very good, but it missed me at that critical point where I want to understand the reality of being on this battlefield.
I remember when I was in, this was 8th grade history class. Of course, I read all of the books like you're talking about to have all these maps in and stuff like that. All right, especially when it came to Napoleon and all of that and what was going on. Because there's the strategic, there's the why are we fighting this war? Then there's the strategic level of what we're going to do. And then there's the individual battles that are going on.
Well, the individual, like if you're running with a spear and you got to go up a hill, try it. It's hard. You're going to get tired. And then there's a mile to still cross on that battlefield, and these guys are shooting arrows at you. Like, put me inside that guy's helmet for a second.
Okay. Now that's something that Uncle Robert talked about. I'm going to get to his notes on exactly that topic in just a moment. But I was saying that when I was in 8th grade English class, I think we were studying the Civil War. And I remember one of the girls in the class, this was Coach Higginbotham, I really loved, who was teaching this class, and he was really good. But we were all right, now we're getting to the Civil War part of this. And he was like, because he's about to get into like, all right, let's talk about some of the strategies of the Civil War and stuff like that. And this girl at front of the class, and who knows, maybe she was being intentionally a bimbo. But I remember like when he was starting to talk about like the troop movements and the army movements and all of that. And she goes, oh, you mean like at a war, they don't just all and she made that kind of motion and like that's the war. And I was like, no, what kind of moron do you have to be to think that the US Civil War was just like some people shooting at each other for a while? But that's what you would have thought if you watched this movie, because there was nothing else other than that when it came to battles or the whole war for that matter. He never told you why they were at war. Like why was Napoleon fighting in Egypt? All of a sudden you cut to, hey, Napoleon's got this army in Egypt. That movie gives you no reason to understand why all of a sudden Napoleon got this army in Egypt.
Well, and to your point, they skipped the entire Italian campaign.
Which is one of the things you could have made a whole movie about.
So now I've read the book War and Peace, and it's one of my favorite books. And for those of you who don't know, Napoleon is actually a character, a side character in War and Peace, almost like this haunting ghost that comes into these scenes at times. But the story is told from the Russian side, and it talks about the incompetence of the Russian army and their failure to confront Napoleon and how they were just destroyed at Borodino. It's just one place, and how Napoleon slowly advances into Russia, and how the Tsar abandons Moscow. Napoleon takes and occupies Moscow, but it's a fruitless victory because he can't do anything with it, and then he must withdraw, and he loses, I think, 400,000 troops in that Russian winter. It is apocalyptic. It is catastrophic. It's one of the worst catastrophes in terms of the number of troops lost. It's reminiscent of Stalingrad, in which something very similar happened in Russia to the Nazi troops. So, excuse me, I got a little tickle in my throat. I enjoyed the scenes of him in Moscow, for example, but I didn't get any sense of the gravity of what happened to the Grand Army of the Republic, not the scale, scope, and majesty of it marching into Russia, nor the apocalyptic withering to a skeletal nothingness that came out of Russia under Napoleon's leadership. I don't know how that was missed. That was something. The War and Peace captured it so amazingly. And then here's this movie, and it really skipped it.
Oh, it skipped it. It was just awful. I mean, it tries to give like so much, like pack so much into somebody behind him, which we're going to get. No, I don't know who they are. But we're going to talk about that too. But like, we can't. Like one of the people on his staff say, we can't. We've spent too much time here. Completely skipping any type of strategic decision making or why they're spending a lot of time or anything like that. It's just like, oh, we've spent too much time here. Just throw your popcorn, like just ridiculous. I mean, from a historical perspective, that's one thing, but also from any sense of drama. I mean, I'm talking about this from both sides. Like if you were going to skip it from the historical perspective because you've got too much time to cover, that's one thing. But then you've got to come up with some other way for this to have dramatic weight in the film. And so many times I got things to talk about with that too. There's no dramatic weight. Did you feel any kind of drama when he goes, we've spent too much time here in Russia? None.
I felt some dramatic weight when he said, I didn't think the Tsar had it in him, to burn down Moscow.
You should have set up why it was so important to take Moscow, because Napoleon thought if I take Moscow, he'll surrender. It's really important because the winter's coming and whatever, but we're going to seize Moscow. And so it should have, like, you would have built up that drama. If you take Moscow, Napoleon is won. And then flip that and go, oh my God, what did they do?
So
then
a couple things.
Heath,
totally agree. You're totally right. That should have been set up. And Robert, it doesn't skip the winter. It just makes it seem like it was a bad withdrawal. And I was like, bad withdrawal? This is one of the most epic collapses of an army due to the monster of winter in human history. And I felt like that needed to be addressed, captured, and the gravity of such a destruction of such a great army was such an important detail. There were some things I liked. I liked seeing Moscow. I liked seeing them march into it. I liked him in the empty palace and sitting in the Tsar's chair. I liked the pigeon droppings. There was something very haunting about that.
Well, it was haunting, but you should have set that up by what they were expecting it to be. Because they just show up and it's the scenes you're talking about. They don't set that up at all, which is why it's interactive drama.
Well, I would say they set it up in the sense that he wasn't expecting it to be abandoned, that he thought that the Tsar outsmarted him by burning his own city, that it was a bad thing they set up the most rudimentary aspects to understand that it was a bad turn of events for him. But there's so much more there. If you're going to bother filming it, why not understand all the angles that play into this moment in history and what it meant and what we're going to do about it, and then film it. So again, I thought the visuals were good in the Russia sequence. I like some of it. I love seeing the gold domes of Russia when his army marched in there. I thought it was cool when Moscow was burning. But again, War and Peace does it better. I mean, I would rather read War and Peace again.
So here's another on the subject of battles. Here's a note from Wild Barley. Wild Barley says the reuse of the Gladiator opening battle set location for the Battle of Austerlitz struck me as the most breathtakingly lazy filmmaking I've ever seen from a renowned director. I recognized individual trees, so much so that I looked it up, and sure enough, it's the Bourne Wood in Surrey. Yeah, so Wild Barley picked up on that immediately. He was like, man, this scene, this battle where we're doing Austerlitz, this really lame Austerlitz, is exactly shot in the same location as the opening battle in Gladiator.
Huh. Now that is amazing.
Why?
Yeah, why? There's a real battlefield out there. I don't know, with today's, you could use miniatures, you could use CGI, you could use real location, a combination of real location. I don't know, like when they filmed Gettysburg, didn't they film at Gettysburg?
They filmed at Gettysburg. Yeah.
I mean, you're using the exact topography. And that's a big deal in military engagements. That the topography and setup of the land.
Ridley Scott didn't care. Like Ridley Scott, I don't think he actually ran out of money. I just think that he didn't care. That, hey, if I just show people shooting at each other and I show some artillery shooting and then cavalry charging, we'll just say that's the Battle of Austerlitz. He didn't care.
Yeah, it was an abbreviated version of it. Like, again, some parts of it I didn't mind. I like some of the filming of it. When I thought with a high budget, you have great costumes, you have great there was a lot of extras. He didn't use CGI extras. That was one thing I did.
That was one thing I do remember. I think I turned it off as soon as this came on because I didn't want to watch anything about it. But I remember them talking about wanting to use real horses, and I was like, "Oh, wait a minute, this is something I'm gonna have to go back and find whatever that was." But like, it was real cavalry charges, and the people who that goes back to the costuming and that kind of thing, doing a really good job at depicting, which I thought when you see that Napoleonic infantry, Napoleonic cavalry, it's just that what Ridley Scott did with them was awful.
I wish there was a few more shots, like free-floating camera in between horses on a cavalry charge, for instance. I want to be a fly in between these, I want to be in that cavalry charge. Show me what it looks like. There's the buttocks of horses in front of you. You've got smoke coming as they're bombing in. It's coming in, and you can see individual cannons coming over. Put me in that charge. And I say cavalry charge because this was the last great era of the cavalry charge, where there was a romantic notion. By World War I, the cavalry charge was not romantic.
No. By the American Civil War.
Well, no, there was still some romance to a cavalry charge. Yeah. Okay, you're right. You're right.
There was still romance to being a cavalryman. Yes,
right.
There was no romance to charging Civil War era rifles.
Correct.
The gallant.
I'll just say that the military doctrine still included it up until World War I. At that point, it was like,
that's a good
point. Okay. This is off the board.
It's completely off the board by World War
the cavalry charge.
Right. Yeah. And by the Civil War, I got I got your comment. I just flagged a comment by Robert. Roll to Win Crap says, I was going to say, don't forget Jeb Stuart. Right. I know. But by the time the American Civil War came around, cavalry did still have romance, but they were predominantly scouts. They were reconnaissance forces. Jeb Stuart was Lee's eyes. Robert E. Lee did not use Jeb Stuart and his cavalry in a frontal cavalry charge like they did in the Napoleonic era. That would have been suicidal.
Well, my main point was this is one of your last great eras of the cavalry charge.
Yeah.
As embodied by Napoleonic
cavalry charge, this was the great era. Yes.
This was. And I wanted to be in one. And by the way, if you ever read War and Peace, there's a great chapter that puts you in the saddle of a cavalry charge on the Russian side, charging Napoleon's lines. And it's in my head, and it's never going to leave. It's one of my favorite moments. And I remember while I was reading it for the first time, realizing that the author had just put me in a Russian cavalry charge. We're charging Napoleon's front lines, and it didn't go well. But I was there. He got me. And all I could think is, here's a movie. This movie's going to do that. And it didn't. It didn't give me that moment.
Murat, which we're going to talk about some of the marshals I've got in my notes here. He was flamboyant. He was amazing. He was every bit that cavalry commander, and he commanded some of the greatest cavalry charges in history because everything was primed for this. And so you could have had this flamboyant, feather-wearing cavalry commander who was also the king of Naples, by the way.
Oh, nice.
As part of this. And it's just not there. Because yes, if you're ever going to show a cavalry charge that's we're not knights, beyond the Middle Ages, cavalry charges in the era of musketry, the Napoleonic Wars has the greatest ones ever.
This is it. This is the movie to do it.
And this would have been the movie to do it.
I mean, I would have, if it were me, I would have included a cavalry charge as a set piece feature of my film. I would have had thousands of horses, thousands of accomplished writers, and I would have captured not only epic, wide range scenes where you could see them moving across the terrain. I would have had an aerial where I'm racing with them over the top, and I would have then dropped right in between where you're right in the middle of the pack and you're moving toward the front. I would have cut to the musket guys and the artillery guys, seeing them come at you. I would have shown, to me, it was the time to get it exactly right. Get it right. Show us the cavalry charge. Anyway, I felt a little cheated with that. I really wanted that, and that was something on my list that, my wish list that was oddly left out of this movie.
Okay, I don't. I was okay. Let me say I've got an answer to that question or that solution, an answer to that question that or way to make a movie that you're talking about, Doug. But let me not go there quite yet. Let me go back to some of the very beginning stuff. Wild Barley. This was the first thing Wild Barley said, and I've seen other people mention this, like in comments and things. Wild Barley said, the best stories invite you to join them, to sit by the fire and learn their secret joys. Napoleon, the film, proffered no such offer nor held no such secret joy or any such secret joy. My three-word description would be severe, colorless, and incoherent. And the colorlessness was one of the things that as soon as I had talked about, okay, my God, this was terrible, how boring, maybe we should do a number on Caesar like this. Wild Barley brought up, there is no color. It started off desaturated and continues this way. That there was color in history. They did have color. And they needed more color.
Well, see, I disagree on the most minor level. I thought it was coherent in the sense that you got an impression of what happened with Napoleon. You saw his role in the French Revolution. You saw his rise in the French Republic. You saw there was the Reign of Terror. There was an impression of each of these periods of history. His exile on Helena and Elba. So I felt that it was coherent in a basic sense. However, if I was going to tell a story, I would want more context, and I'd want it to be more experiential, visceral, and personal. And this was very much wide scope. Again, scrapbooks. I think it was valuable in its portrayal of these images and visuals of these moments in history. It gave me something to look at to match what I had imagined all these years right there on the screen. And I enjoyed that. However, I don't think it was personal or impactful on an emotional level. I think it really lacked on the emotional level.
Okay, so Positive Fandom had said, this is going back, like I said, I am starring people's comments as I see them to come back to. So some we bring up, some of them I want to come back to because I've got notes on this. But like, for instance, Positive Fandom says, this is the first historical comedy I've ever seen about Napoleon. You think you're so smart because you have boats. Okay, when he talks to the British. So that's, yes. And like, that's a line right there that sounds like it should reference something. And yet it doesn't in the movie. Like, how do you have a line like that? I mean, first of all, how are you if you're going to tell all of Napoleon's story, how do you not even mention Trafalgar?
Trafalgar was skipped too.
Right. Trafalgar skipped. But yet he has this line about, you think you're so smart because you have boats. And yet for some reason, they don't even bring Napoleon the news of Trafalgar, because that's part of, this was a repeat kind of Athens and Sparta. We see this see this play out a couple of times in history where you have one great land power and you have one great sea power. And so we had that in Sparta. We had that with Athens in the Peloponnesian War. We have this again with France and Great Britain.
Well, the Punic Wars with Rome and Carthage.
You're right. Yes. Rome and Carthage again in the Punic Wars. Yes. So that's a common thing to play out. That could have played out here again, especially since you have reference to it in lines like that. But yet Trafalgar, not something that we're even going to bring up in this movie. So,
which I think is amazing because Trafalgar was so pivotal.
And Trafalgar could be his own movie. I mean, Trafalgar could be.
Oh my God. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, why not just tell that story? You could almost, I don't know. You could do, I think if I was going to tell the set pieces, you got to do Austerlitz, you got to do Waterloo, but Trafalgar, man, I mean, because that changes everything.
Admittedly, Napoleon's not at Trafalgar. So if you're trying to tell Napoleon's life, it depends on what the purpose of the movie.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
You wouldn't, if you're telling Napoleon's life, you wouldn't show Trafalgar, but you would have Napoleon be brought news of Trafalgar and its impact on, especially if you're telling the political situation, the strategic situation, the geopolitical situation of what's going on, and then all of a sudden the British have won at Trafalgar. How does that change things?
Now we're landlocked. We are a continental army only. Which I mean, that's his entire strategy, Napoleon at that point, which should not have been as successful as it was, but he was such a brilliant tactician, he made it work. But again, that wasn't really conveyed in the film.
Where do you want to go next? I've got an idea. I've got an idea, but do you have where do you want to go next?
Well, I was going to end with what this should have been, like your take on what it should have been, maybe Barley's take on what it should have been, and people in the chat if they want to chime in. I think we should end on that. But did you have anything in between that you wanted to cover? Because let me see.
Let's see. I'm looking through here because my notes are all scattered. I'm like Xing out things that I've already covered.
I didn't know if you also wanted to discuss, the real history. We're mentioning some of the things that were skipped, but there's
the Spanish War. Oh, speaking of things that are skipped, I got a note right here. The Spanish ulcer is not in this. Did this ever mention the problem of the Spanish War?
There might have been one comment about Spain.
Was there one? Okay. Was there one comment about Spain? Okay. So, all right. So at most we got.
I think there was one comment.
So Spain was not, contrary to Napoleonic history, Spain was not a factor in this movie that you have to get this. Look, I was going to say, listen, from the, I mean, I've got other things too, but from the perspective of the characterization, this gives you no reason why people love Napoleon. I mean, like why the soldiers there and the people of France, why did they love him? You could watch this and you have no idea about why he is actually beloved by his soldiers, why he could crown himself, why he can come back from Elba and be received. I saw nothing in this that explained why he was a beloved person. None. And I would have built, going to the idea of what was this, I would have built a lot of a movie around that. Several different storylines that I could have constructed would have really tried to explain why, when you have somebody like, and then we can name a few people like this in history. There's there's S or S tier, as the people say now, as everybody says now, the S tier and the A tier. Of the S tier people like this, I mean, it's Alexander the Great, Caesar, Napoleon. I mean, and why is it? First of all, they'd have these lives that you just don't even believe are real. And people love them. And none of this movie gave me any reason as to why people would love him.
Well, they had an opportunity because I think it's rooted in the French Revolution. He became a champion of the people. But you're right, the film doesn't really convey that much at all. I think the film kind of portrayed him as being militarily successful and in the right place at the right time, and then having the ability to kind of do what he wanted, to kind of come and go as he pleased until he lost his army in Russia. But it was, they just had that one scene where he kind of comes out of exile and convinces that 1/5 Corps.
We're going to talk about that.
Yeah. That was the only scene that really portrayed him as beloved.
It didn't set that up. Like, no, that. Okay, I guess we're going to talk about that. Talk about this part at the moment. But that's another one of those things that should have been set up, because that should have been an extremely high drama moment of this film, and it was not, because you didn't see why they loved him. You didn't see why they loved him, and then he's thrown out, and then you've got the Bourbon Restoration, and then he's coming back, and man, that scene is lame. I mean, like, here is a scene. I've got a list of several scenes where you should have, the quote is, squeeze the lemon. Here is a high drama scene where I would go, like, if historicity gives you this level of drama, going up, I'm going to give you, history gives you this level of drama. I'm going to crank that up in a film and I'm going to give you that level of drama. And then I would excuse that in filmmaking because I'm like, this is one of their key points. And this is a high drama moment in history. Man, I'm going to crank that up to a 10 here in our film.
Like Kenneth Branagh in Henry V.
Yes. That's the kind of scene that this should have been. Because, Napoleon, that's one of the iconic scenes, because I've got lists of iconic scenes that happened to Napoleon. And it's Marshal Ney, I believe, who is approaching him, and they are coming to arrest him, and he's there. Man, if I'm direct, what does he do? He tears open his uniform, bares his breast to the soldiers, kneeling down, tearing it open. Will you shoot your emperor? Like I can think of a million ways to squeeze that lemon and get us drama out of that scene. First, by setting it up about why they love him, and then why they have had to support the Bourbons. And then now they're coming back, and now it's Napoleon's force of personality, his charisma, and he's going to bare his breast before, like, will you shoot me down, or whatever exactly the line is right there. But oh my God, this was terrible, because he just kind of like opens his jacket a little bit and kind of rubs his nipple through his coat and is like, I love France. And that has some impact on these guys. I mean, like, that's basic level direct. Like, look at this moment. Can we make anything happen with this moment that's not, oh, I love France. It's just abysmal. That was just abysmal. And you know what made me, I don't typically laugh out loud at films, and I almost laughed out loud at this because it was so apparent when he goes, and Wild Barley and I laughed at this later at the bar, because first of all, the marshal in charge is not named. Again, that's not personalized. That scene should have been personalized as well, because wasn't it Ney? It was Marshal Ney who was there, right?
Yeah, it's important to get these names right. Like, if you're going to do historical fiction,
it's important to get the names right. We're going to go to this as well, but there are a lot of other characters you could have brought in. If I say, all right, we've got this scene where Napoleon is being, the army has been sent to arrest him, and he's going to have this. We're going to have this high drama scene where he's tearing open his jacket and exposing his naked chest to to potential musketry. We're going to personalize this drama again for the purposes of a film in a single person. So not only does that whole army, we need to feel it with that whole army, but we're going to feel it with a single person who has loved Napoleon so much, then fallen out with him. Now he's back. And so when I cut to a close up, I want that actor to portray everything that the entire army is feeling. And that should have been the marshal in charge, but it's a nameless leader. But I laughed because when Napoleon approaches, he says the Fifth Army. It's the Fifth Army. And then, like, 3 lines later, he approaches them and says, 5th Regiment. And I was like, that is a showing of, like, oh, wait a minute. This is supposed to be something really grand. It's the entire 5th Army. But then it seemed like, like a few days later when they were actually filming, you know what? We don't actually have the budget to put a whole army there. How about
regiment is very different.
So a few lines later, this needs to be the 5th Regiment. And Wild Barley and I were laughing at this. It's like, and then another line later, hey, 5th Fifth Company. There are 40 of you back here, right? Did we have enough money to hire 40 people? So that goes from being the 5th Army to being the 5th Regiment in like 3 lines. I mean, I nearly laughed out loud.
Yeah, again, I think
Yes,
for
I
the
had a thought,
sake
sorry.
of the movie, it was scrapbooking again. He gave you a basic impression of each of these moments and then moved on. I don't think, because if he tried to build up the context for each of these scenes, it's not going to happen. So a lot of these scenes wouldn't have even made the movie if he had to build context for them. But that's why it's so important to pick your through line and then stick with it. Their through line was Napoleon and Josephine, and that's why all of these other scenes were markedly reduced to basic impressionism. Impression of the moment, impression of the exchange. It was, he just did not set these up. I don't think he was trying to set them up. I think his goal was to do basic impressions of these historical moments. And I think that's what he did, and I think that's what this movie was.
Stray asked, "Does that feel good to let it out?" Well, there's still more to come. There's still more to come. I've been bottling it up ever since I've seen this movie. I don't know what other people are saying on YouTube about this movie, but this is okay. So, also the portrayal of Napoleon. I'm still starring some people's comments too. I see that as they're coming in. But Napoleon, to me, is a very dynamic person.
Yeah.
And he's not dynamic in this film at all. And this goes back to explaining why people love him. Like, man, if you had me depicting Napoleon, I mean, what kind of person is Napoleon? He's one of those people who don't sleep. I wish I were one of those people. One of those people who do not sleep. Napoleon, I wanted to see an extremely dynamic Napoleon. Who, something happens. Napoleon was always a man with a plan. He always had a plan. Even when he lost, like when he lost one of the battles and the campaigns of the Italian campaign. And then, the first thing he did was just like send off a whole bunch. Like, I would have also seen them writing a bunch of letters. Like, he would have been saying, but like, papers out. I'm writing this now. Take this to there. Take this over here. Like, so he loses and he writes these letters blasting the directory back in Paris about, you didn't supply me and I don't have enough men and everything. That's why I lost these battles. Go take that to Paris. And then as soon as they're out the tent, he's like, all right, now this is what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to get back to this. And we'll start writing more orders to get back in action in order to defeat this army. And I would have seen him on horses galloping a lot because I'm over here. And now all of a sudden I hear there's trouble over there. Napoleon grabs his staff, is on like galloping horseback. I got to get up into the mountains because that's where I've got to be. He's always got to be in the thick of things.
Right.
Like here, now I'm commanding this and all of a sudden down here to the extent that like even when there are great surrenders, he's not there. He'll delegate the surrender to somebody else because, okay, I've defeated them. Now we're going to go through the surrender ceremony and whatever. I don't have time for that. Marshal whoever or General whoever, you accept
Right.
the surrender from that army because I'm getting on a horseback because I'm going to go intimidate the Pope. Right? Like that's already won. I don't have time for the surrender. You take his sword. I'm going down here to do something else. And then he's going to write a love letter to Josephine. So, I've just, and then the Italian campaign, now I've got to write the Constitution for Venice. Like, time for me to write a new Constitution to something else. So I would have shown him, okay, now are we done with the combat planning for the night? Okay, everybody's got their orders. Okay, great. What am I going to, everybody go to bed. What am I going to do? Oh, I'm going to write the Constitution for a new Republic of Venice. And I'm sitting this. And then I woke up in the morning at 4 a.m. and I thought, the theaters in Paris are just not operating the way I want them to. So I'm going to write out new rules for how the theaters in Paris should operate. Take that to Paris. Oh, it's now 6 o'clock. I got to go defeat the Austrians. That's great. How I would have depicted Napoleon.
Like manic and energetic.
Yeah, right. Like this is a guy who does everything constantly.
Well, and he did.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's not in this movie. It's not in this movie. So the portrayal of Napoleon, and that would have helped you understand why people, one of the things about why people love him. You want me to give you? We do want to talk about what we would have done, but you say you want to talk about that last. You want to give you what my Uncle Robert would have done, which actually addresses your conversation with the cavalry charge.
Oh, interesting.
So it's not exactly the cavalry charge. He tells it from the perspective of infantry, but he says this. This is interesting. He says that, okay, for a more relatable approach to Napoleon. Now, he's a novelist and a Napoleonic scholar. So he does say this could have been handled better on 4 or 6 episodes of streaming. And I also thought about that as I was watching, that I was like, this probably should be a streaming series. If you're going to try to tackle all of Napoleon, this needed to be a streaming series, if that was your goal. So yes, I would have said, but he said better handled in 4 to 6 streaming series. If you're going to try to cover this period from the siege of Toulon to the final exile, roughly 22 years. He says that he would have done this by following 2 principal characters, Napoleon and a soldier that he would have called Jean-Paul. And he says, soldier and officer, so Napoleon and the soldier, first encounter one another during the siege of Toulon. Both are wounded in action. And then we follow both of them through this story. One rising as the emperor, the other rising through the lowly ranks to become a sergeant of the old guard. Critical battles to the narrative appear from 2 perspectives. This will give you both the general's perspective and the in the fight perspective. So he says, give Napoleon's perspective from the rear, issuing orders, receiving commands, doing all of that with the maps, commanding all of that. While then you also have another character, Jean-Paul, who is going to give you that intimate view of the foot soldier standing about, marching into action, blinded by the big picture, which by smoke and the trauma and all of that, and what it's like to be in a Napoleonic battle. Have occasionally Napoleon spot Jean-Paul while reviewing his troops. So then you can have interaction between the 2 occasionally hitting throughout this. I think it's a good idea. Remembering him from Toulon and making a point to recognize him for his valor, as Napoleon would do, recognizing soldiers, calling them out for their valor, going back to why do people love him? Because he would do that kind of thing. So
okay, that's a good idea.
He's calling that so he can recognize Jean. Oh, you're here. You're part of the old, advancing the ranks of the old guard. And that way you can have connection between Napoleon and this soldier. We see glimpses, therefore, of Napoleon as the brilliant planner, the strategist, the megalomaniac, and also the tyrant, point out the reforms that he implemented, as well as the atrocities. Jean-Paul only sees these glossy images and then the devastation. So you get to see that through that character's perspective. But he also, Jean-Paul, embraces the revolution while overlooking the betrayal of Napoleon when he crowns himself, which I also want to talk about. He says, have both men survive the Russia campaign. That way you could show the Russia campaign, thus from Napoleon's perspective and the perspective of the foot soldier. Jean-Paul, he says, Robert says, Jean-Paul leaves service after the first exile and doesn't rejoin the 100 days in Waterloo. Actually, I think I think I would disagree with that. Go ahead and show that. If Jean-Paul, you're using him to show the betrayal and the disillusionment with Napoleon, but then how does he get him back? But then when he comes up, have him be there when he bears his breast and show the foot soldier and Jean-Paul's reaction and have him embrace Napoleon, I actually think. Napoleon ultimately sits out his days on St. Helena while Jean-Paul bakes bread or makes shoes or whatever in Paris, mourning the loss of the revolution and the return of the monarchy. But a friend holds aloft a baguette and assures Jean-Paul that the revolution is not lost. It rests in the French soil or in the food that feeds its people, or this very bread, or some kind of other stirring words, presumably uttered while drunk. Of course, they won't get their republic back until 1848, when they will have snatched it away from Napoleon's nephews. That would be a great way to do a Napoleonic series, I think. He says, I doubt this sort of treatment would be done by an American or a Brit. It would need a French writer, cast, and director. The French have a subtlety and humor that we and the Brits find difficult to pull off. They also know how to linger with the scene and play with dialogue, which makes for memorable characters. A very long engagement was excellent and intimate story with humor, yet it captured the horror of the World War I trenches. That would have been I think, a potentially great way to do a Napoleonic story.
I like it. I like that whole idea. And well, it's really all predicated on the fact that you're not going to try to cram this into a 3-hour movie.
Yeah.
The scope that was captured in this movie and the time it had, I think the best you could do was scrapbooking, impressionism, blowing past these historical moments. You don't have the ability to set up all the context for each of these scenes because there's a lot of context required. However, with the long form format, with like a streaming service or multi-episode miniseries or something like that, then you could take 1 hour and just do Toulon. Just do Toulon in one episode. Give us all the background, give us all the context, show us those human stories. That's the way to do this. So I agree with him there. I love that idea of trying to tell it from two competing storylines and points of view, one from the infantry soldier and the other from Napoleon. I think that's great. And I think that would have been a good way to contrast two different perspectives of the exact same event. But for me, the key would be providing that context and using the long form storytelling rather than a single film. Because the single film, it just takes too much off the table. And you're left with this.
Yeah, it looks like we've been covering a lot of things people were saying in the comments about would this be better about a trilogy or a saga or things like that. And I also saw comments about the personality of Napoleon, which I just addressed. I would have made him much more dynamic. So I
love that idea to have him kind of manic and energetic, because guys like this come out once in a while in history and they try to do everything. And watching someone with that on their plate is interesting. I think it's interesting to see someone who wants to recodify the entire law of the culture, while going out in person to mitigate these wars and defeating entire coalitions that are aligned against you. I mean, there's so much context behind Napoleon that the opportunity is there to take your time with it.
One of my other major concerns, because when you think about the characters in this movie, when you think about who are the characters in this movie, you think Napoleon and you think Josephine. The only other one that you might think is Tsar Alexander.
Oh yeah, he was actually okay in this.
Okay, we'll talk about Tsar Alexander in a moment. But those are the only three. But this story from this era of history comes with a whole slew of amazing characters, and those characters are Napoleon's marshals. They're amazing. I was just watching a 2-hour documentary going over all, I believe it's 26 of Napoleon's marshals.
Oh, wow.
And they're such incredible characters. And I knew like Marshal Ney and Marshal Murat and Davout and Bessier and all of these. And I knew all of these characters from, their names and so forth from the Napoleonic obsession of youth. And that they're a major part of this and the things Napoleon said. And that's why I was refreshing all of my memory on this the other day when I was going through all of this. It's like, the American Civil War also has an amazing cast of characters.
Yes.
And Gettysburg, that movie, leans into the cast of characters. You've got Lee, you've got Stonewall Jackson, you've got Nathaniel Bedford Forrest, you've got all these characters that you're leaning into and developing in a film way to tell this story. Well, I mean, imagine if you tried to tell Gettysburg, but you didn't have if you didn't do any of the characterization of them, that was what this movie is. This movie also, because of the time period, comes with all of these built in really amazing flamboyant characters on there. I mean, not all of them are flamboyant necessarily, but amazing characters who, if it weren't for Napoleon, you would also think are really amazing characters of history, but they're there with Napoleon, but they're serving Napoleon.
Like Scottie Pippen all of a sudden.
Yeah. And so the fact that I don't even think that any of them got name checked, like that there were other people standing around him, but I have no idea who was Ney, who was Bessier, who was Murat, if he was there. They were just complete non-entities.
Correct.
And so, like I said, Murat is one of my favorites because he's the flamboyant cavalry commander. And, Napoleon, when he's carving up Europe, it's like, I mean, it's the same kind of way that it was with Alexander and his generals. that like, hey, I have an idea. How about you be the king of Naples? You know, you're my cavalry commander and you're a marshal of France. But, you know, if we're not fighting and we're kind of in the winter, you can just have a great vacation as the king of Naples. You know, and who becomes like the crown, one of his marshals becomes the crown prince of Sweden. And actually the Swedish king is still descendant from Napoleon's marshals and all. So we have this cast of characters that we could have developed in the same way that the Gettysburg movie did. And we just do not. And that was to its extreme detriment.
Well, again, to me, the Napoleonic era is like Middle Earth, Lord of the Rings. You know, it's like there's so many players, there's so many cultures and continents or nations, let's say, that are involved in this drama. You know, to me, if you're going to tackle it, I think if you're going to tackle it in a 2.5-hour movie, you either pick a very narrow topic or you do this, what Ridley Scott did, this broad thing, or you don't do it this way at all. Like you just said, you take your time with it. You know, develop all of these things. All of these personalities are critical to understanding or getting some insight into what happened with all of this.
Retro's here. I just saw.
What's up, Retro?
Positive Phantom says this has been such a great discussion tonight. Well, I'm glad people are
Awesome.
enjoying it. I am really glad this has been enjoying it. Okay, before we get, because I know when we talk about the theme and how this could have gone, did you notice this was also one of those things I was like, God, this is just one of the things that goes by, because we haven't talked about the Tsar Alexander yet. But when they come to after the 100 Days campaign, and they're once again, okay, everybody's gonna be sitting around a table talking again. Of course, who was it that was fighting at Waterloo? It was the British and the Prussians that were fighting against, fighting against the French, Napoleon. But they didn't develop the Prussians at all in this. They didn't develop Bavaria. They didn't develop the Prussians are significant. The Prussians and Austrians. We did have Austrians a little bit. We had a little bit of Austrians, but we didn't have any Prussians. But the Prussians are supposed to be the allies of the British at Waterloo. But when they are at the table and they're talking about who he's going to be squaring off with, they say the British and they show Wellington. Right. But then they say, and the Prussian army. But they show Tsar Alexander, the Russian.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they cut and show Tsar Alexander sitting there instead of any Prussian.
That is an awkward. That's a mistake.
I instantly saw it. I said, when they did that, I was like, oh, it's because they haven't developed the Prussians at all as characters in this, and so they can't just show this. They can't just show somebody else. But we have had the Russian Tsar in this. So maybe people won't notice that we said Prussian instead of Russian, and we can just show Tsar Alexander and people will think that makes sense. It didn't make sense to me. I instantly noticed. I was like, that's Tsar Alexander. He's a Russian. He's not a Prussian. Prussians are Germans, of course, as for anyone who the Prussians, the Bavarians, and the Prussians are the ones who are supposed to be the extremely militaristic culture, and that's because they, from the geography perspective, they occupy the plains. So if you occupy the plains of Germany, the Bavarians occupy the mountains. So if you have two different cultures, one who occupy plains and one who occupy mountains, which one's going to be the more militaristic culture? The classic physical geographic determinist perspective on that is, of course, it's going to be the people who live in the plains, like the Prussians are, because you don't have any natural defenses. You have to be a militaristic culture because you can't rely on the mountains to defend you, like the Bavarians could. So the Prussians,
you got to be able to fight out in the open,
right? Frederick the Great, all of that. The Prussians, this great army. Frederick the Great was prior to Napoleon. And then the Napoleonic era Prussian armies were inheritors of Frederick the Great's military tradition, but they just skipped that. Instead, they showed Tsar Alexander when they say the Prussians. Oh, James says I noticed that too. Okay, so I'm right in that. So James is like, okay, so we could go to the Russians instead. I mean,
that's just a flat out mistake at that point.
Well, it's just I don't think it was a mistake in that, they didn't know what they were doing. I think it was like, okay, we do have to say Prussians because I don't think they must have thought we can't actually say Russians. because that wouldn't be right. But on the other hand, we can't introduce new characters here because it's too late. So let's just show the Russians.
But in my opinion, if you're being consistent with this impressionism of history, then just have just put a Prussian there. I mean, who cares? You're not obviously taking the time to build out the context. So at that point, I think you don't even need to bother whether the character was introduced or not. I mean, to me, putting a Prussian there would have been consistent with the abbreviated version of these events that we got already. So to me, it's even more confusing that they put Tsar Alexander there.
Let's see. Well, but even what do you say about this? That it clearly it didn't make it seem like, it just said that it was the defeat in Russia that caused Napoleon to abdicate.
Correct.
And we have no Leipzig. We have no Leipzig. What are you going to do with no Leipzig? Because Napoleon. Well, we're talking about one of the stories you could tell. I mean, everybody is like, when he's faced at Leipzig, he's not going to win Leipzig. Like there were a couple of areas where it was close. Murat could have won Leipzig. Maybe. I mean, maybe there's like a 2% chance that you could have gotten out of Leipzig. But basically, Napoleon's not getting out of Leipzig. But he does winning Leipzig. He does escape from Leipzig. And then there's a campaign in France afterwards. And he is once again fighting, back and forth, up here, down here. We got to save Paris. Blah, da, 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 da. We're going this way. And then eventually Paris surrenders. This could have been such a powerful moment. First of all, you show Leipzig. Then you have the campaign to save Paris and save France. And Napoleon running all over the place again, winning battles, but not everything. And then, he's like, I can't, if I lose Paris, my positions can become untenable. And then you have Paris is besieged and Paris falls. And then a word gets back to Napoleon that Paris has fallen. And that could be such a powerful scene. I mean, if we're talking about scenes where you squeeze the lemon and you get drama out of it, I mean, the time when Napoleon hears that Paris has surrendered. And then
his whole thing was, I love my country.
Well, he's like, I can't do it. Like, I can do this. If I lose Paris, my position becomes untenable, which is what did happen. And then he's winning battles. He's running this way, whatever. And then Paris surrenders. And then word comes to him and he just sits down. And if you had portrayed him as a hugely dynamic individual all the time, a man with a plan always, and then all of a sudden he's hit with this news that Paris has surrendered, and he just stops. Like visually, that's why I'm talking about the drama here. If at that moment he just stops and he sits down like he did historically and just completely shuts down for like 15 minutes. It doesn't have to be 15 minutes on this, but he just shuts down. And he's like, oh my God. And then he was in the field when his marshals come to him and say, you're going to have to abdicate. He wasn't in Paris. He was in the field because he was in the command of the army when Paris fell. And now his marshals are like, Paris is gone. You got to get out of here. You're done. And he makes that. And I just, a lost opportunity to show the tomb of Frederick the Great, Napoleon. Gentlemen, if this man were still alive, I would not be here. Yes, that would have connected you to the Prussians. See, that actually would have been a great connection to the Prussians. And now, from the dramatic perspective, now the Prussians are on the march with the British, and we're going to Waterloo. You
right.
Brought up. You want me to show this image?
Well, that's the image you're describing. Where this energetic, like genius, manic personality has run out of moves and has, physically dealing with total defeat at that point. Yes. That would have been a fantastic dramatic contrast. That was just again. So for me, I write historical fiction and I love historical fiction. And for me, the beauty of it is getting inside the moment where you understand things that the history books don't necessarily get to. You get it. You get the tactical overview. You get all these little things, but you want to get in and understand how a moment in history functions. All the little things that feed into that moment. That level of comprehension is a gift. if a storyteller can present it, tell you a compelling story, and then also have you leave the story and be like, I understand Waterloo on a level I never would have understood Waterloo, or the French Revolution, or Toulon, or whatever it is, that the person experiencing the story walks away, thinks of the historical figures differently, believes that they could have existed in a way that doesn't make them mythical, but like human, it humanizes them, and then also leaves you with an impression of an event in history that you now understand on a whole different level. Like there's that line at the end of Titanic where he's like, I never let it in. I never let Titanic in. That's what James Cameron was trying to do. He was trying to say, yeah, here's this tactical thing. It hits the iceberg at this time. It cracks, the electricity, and then it sunk at this time at night. And she's like, thanks for that fine forensic explanation. And then you go through this whole movie, and at the end, he's like, I never understood it. Nobody watches that movie Titanic without thinking like, I know what it was like to be on there now. Like you walk away with something, you understand all the little things about how that ship went down at a level that you never would have gotten on your own. You never would have gotten just by reading a book. That's the way I think a good historical fiction story should be told. So to me, the long form is critical. So all of these details that you're talking about, every single one, the names of the officers, Leipzig, what it meant for Paris to fall, how to capture the moment when he shows up and tries to convince the 5th Regiment or 5th Army that his intentions are still pure. Yeah, the 5th Armament.
5th Platoon.
Regiment. But yeah, a regiment's like, 50 people versus an army, which is, tens of, it's pretty big different. Anyway, my point is, if you're gonna do it and you take the time to paint these things out, because there are a lot of dynamics that play into it. There are a lot of personalities. It's not just Josephine and Napoleon. Take the time to do. In fact, if anything, again, I enjoyed the movie for its impression of events as they played out in the time that he had. He just didn't have the time to build these things out. However, it did leave me with an incredible appetite to do all the things that you're describing, which is now I want to see 1 hour of just Toulon. I want to see it played by a young Napoleon. I want to see all the details lined up. I want to see, 2 or 3 hours, 2 or 3 episodes of 1 hour each of Austerlitz. How did it put me in it? Let me walk away and know something about Austerlitz the way I felt after I saw like Titanic, for example.
Okay, I got a note from Wild Barley here that is this was Jafford's note about being a trilogy or saga. I think we covered that. Yeah, it probably could. But let's see. But Positive Fandom says the film often contradicts itself. We saw scenes that painted Napoleon in a negative light, but on more than one scene, people praising in and admiring him in the military, France, and abroad. Was it worth it? Well, we saw him painting him in a negative light, but that was my point, that we don't, when they're praising him and admiring him, we really don't understand why. Like we didn't really grapple with that. But Robert says, now how much of this was out of desire not to celebrate Napoleon? Some of it, yeah. But that depends on exactly what we're going to talk about in a moment here, which is what kind of story you're trying to tell. Because Positive Fandom says director says it's going to be a Napoleon film that doesn't celebrate Napoleon. Production team, but isn't he like one of the greatest strategists, fighters, leaders, and love letter writer? Yeah. So you have to understand. So you got to have a take on this, and I think that this not under. Oh, we're gonna have these scenes with him in a negative light and all of that. Now, not that that's bad, because like we're talking about with the other things we're talking about, that we can show the terrible things he did, the great things that he did, and we all talk about all the time how a story can be a back and forth, and it should be a back and forth when it's best. So if you dealt with that back and forth, you really could have communicated something. But since we don't really ever see Napoleon as just there needed to be scenes in that where everybody in the audience would have gone, oh my God, I would follow that man wherever he leads.
Yes.
You needed the audience to experience that.
I remember watching Breaking Bad. And being like, oh my God, this character, Walter White, is awesome. I love this dude. And then, by season 3, you're like, oh, I don't know about this guy. Someone needs to stop him. you, the viewer, went through this range of feelings toward this lead character. One was like, wow, the small guy's, coming up and taking charge of his life. And then you're like, this guy's a megalomaniac who's dangerous. So Breaking Bad, which did take the long form of storytelling, did go back and forth. They showed you why he's worth admiring, why he was so successful, and then why, when he went too far, he became a problem. Even for viewers of the show who liked Walter White, could recognize that the man had become dangerous and unstable. So you could have done that with Napoleon, no problem. And you're right. It's weird to say it's a Napoleonic film that doesn't celebrate Napoleon. It's like trying to take someone who has this great accomplishment, telling the story of the accomplishment, but in a way that doesn't celebrate him. It's a little bit of a mixed message there. And I don't think it's very coherent.
Give us the back and forth. Give us the back and forth.
Yeah, but I mean,
give us back and forth.
But you're also celebrating. You are celebrating.
You are,
by
but yes,
spending your time telling his story.
The crossing of the Alps. The crossing of the Alps, that was prior to the Italian campaign. I mean, think about great Napoleonic moments. The crossing of the Alps, dramatized, romanticized as Napoleon on the horse.
Totally.
That painting of Napoleon on the horse going across the Alps. There are no Alps. And he's going across the Alps into the Italian campaign.
Would have been awesome.
And it would have been so awesome. And then, of course, in that famous painting, you've got his name, Bonaparte, is on one of the rocks. But then also, like, Hannibal is there. The generals who have also, and then Bonaparte is also conquering the Alps as he's going over. I mean, that is iconic Napoleon. I mean, I can't imagine doing Napoleon and not doing the crossing of the Alps. That is such, Napoleon crossing the Alps is so ingrained into me because we had a puzzle. We had a puzzle of that famous painting, Napoleon crossing the Alps. And every year, my extended family would take a vacation to Florida. And every Florida vacation, that puzzle of Napoleon crossing the Alps would come with us. So it's like, Heath, it's the family Florida vacation. What does that mean? Napoleon crossing the Alps. Like that is associated with family vacation. If you're at the beach, what are you doing in the evenings? Assembling a puzzle of Napoleon crossing the Alps and talking about Napoleon, right? So I would if I had kids, that I would carry on that family tradition. Well, kids, we're on vacation. You know what that means? It's time for the Napoleon puzzle. We're going to talk about some Napoleon. We put together this puzzle and talk about some Napoleon in the evening. That's what we would do. Wild Barley said, omitting the Alps. So this was on that topic we were just talking about. He says, omitting the Alps and Leipzig is this film is aggressive anti-history. To me, the omissions have to indicate this was a failed effort to deconstruct the very value of examining the lives of historical figures. In other words, it was trying to tell the audience that learning history, or at least studying its lives, is just a waste of time. So to do that, it spends 2.5 hours wasting the audience's time.
Well, I agree and disagree. I think that it depends on the vision of the storyteller. I think that what they were trying to do was trying to tell a Napoleonic story with the emphasis on his relationship with Josephine. So I don't think it was attempting to be anti-history. However, where I agree with him is by doing so, by taking that angle that you're going to focus on Josephine and Napoleon's relationship, you have set yourself on a course that is destined to miss so much more of history that it is anti-history by default, not by intent. I think it misses so much of what made Napoleon interesting and so important to not only French history, but to military history, to European history. There's too much that's omitted when you focus on just Napoleon and Josephine.
Okay, I've got more to go into, but I'm personally, I'm going to take a slight break.
Oh, okay.
Toss it to you because Sherry Lee brings. I know you had information on this, and I don't. So I'm going to toss it to you for a moment and listen to you because Sherry Lee asked Doug and Heath, "What are your thoughts about the music?" And I know you had notes on that. So before we get into what the movie could have been, do you want to talk about that, Doug? While I have,
I thought the soundtrack was okay. There were some songs that were really good. and others that were not so good. They tried a lot of what I don't like, which is like period piece music. I don't know if you guys remember the movie Gangs of New York, but it had all this like weird music from like the era that doesn't really resonate with anybody. It's not even a part of any genre anymore. It's kind of like a bygone like subclass of music or sound of music. And this soundtrack included some of those. So I don't really like that too much. I think given the era, this is the early 1800s, late 1700s, especially when you're dealing with a romantic, meaning like figure like Napoleon, I think a Baroque classical style music would have been phenomenal for this. There are plenty of composers out there that would have been capable of this. It doesn't work as well for some of the battle scenes. So I think some of the battle scenes, the soundtrack that they had worked fairly well with the movie. In particular, Toulon. I think one of the early parts of the score was really good. Oh yeah, and on the way home, I took my mother to see Napoleon, and I was explaining how the Overture of 1812 by Tchaikovsky captures, from the Russian perspective, the defeat of Napoleon's army. That's very famous music. That's ba 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 ba, and it's one of the only pieces of music that includes cannons as one of the musical instruments. And it's really hard to find a good recording with the actual cannons being fired in the finale of the war of the Overture of 1812. So, given the era, I think the music tones could have been different. I think that they could have gone a different choice. Even in the movie Aviator with Leonardo DiCaprio, they have some like classical sounding music in there on a couple different tracks, and it's just beautiful. It's perfect. I think that would have worked very, very well for Napoleon. Yeah, and the composer was Martin Phipps, who hasn't done much. So this is probably his biggest, effort in terms of writing a musical score for a feature film.
Heather G. Hey, welcome, Heather. Heather says, rate this movie a 0 out of 10 for someone who's unfamiliar completely. Well, like I'm saying, first time in the chat, I believe, Heather. So you got the toast, but yeah, like even for someone who's familiar with this history, this was not good.
Yeah, I think Heath gave it a 3 out of 10.
I did give it a 3 out of 10, so I was a little bit ahead of you, but
yeah, and I gave it a 6 out of 10. I thought for a feature film, cramming as much in as it did, I got some of what I wanted. I wanted to see some of these moments. And I wanted them to be competently filmed in terms of technical aspects like the costumes, the set designs. So I felt like I got some of what I wanted out of the film. However, when as a historical fiction writer, I would never try to tell this much history in such a short period of time. You're going to sacrifice way too much. And on top of that, like I said just a second ago, I think they picked the wrong through line, which was Napoleon and Josephine. I don't think that was the through line.
Yeah. Although if you were sitting here listening to me for the past 2.5 hours, you probably think I've got it less than 3, and maybe I could be argued that. So I'm also noticing that my teeth and lips are getting increasingly blue as I consume the bottle of wine right here. So that's going on. So you can tell how deep we are into this live stream by, yes, the color of my teeth and lips. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and put this up by Robert, but I think as it leads into this, Robert says, so I just get the sense that in the current era that the decision to go this route is not to lionize the strong man. That way you come away saying Napoleon wasn't that interesting. And I feel what you're saying, because like I was saying, I really wanted a movie, a really great historical epic that was going to grapple with these things, and that I could have taken my, a nephew who was in the 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old range. I mean, or a niece, but somebody who's 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, some say that range, to this movie, and they would have come out of this going, oh, wow, I've got to know more about that. I would have loved to have had a movie like that. But it's a good question that today, can you make a movie? And we'll talk about what movie could be made here in a moment. But can you make a movie that can you make a movie where that you want people to come out of the theater and go, wow, oh my God, I got to read a history book on that? Or is there a documentary I can look up on this guy? Can you do that today? That's a good question.
Well, it did make me look up a lot of stuff on Napoleon. So I learned a lot more after watching the film. And it's part. Now, I knew a lot about him on some basic level, but but it's been a while since I really brushed up on my Napoleonic history. So after this film, it did inspire me to go up and read more on him. But I think that might have more to do with my personality than the film.
It would not have inspired an 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old.
No, I don't think it would have. And so, but to get back to the specific comment, which is the sense that it's hard to tell or lionize a strong male figure, I think there is some truth to that. I think Hollywood in general is very uncomfortable depicting a warrior leader, especially someone like him who's very autocratic. I mean, he's got a checkered past. I think he re-legalized slavery in the French colonies at one point. But then on the other hand, he was very pro-women's rights. He built colleges for women specifically. He was actually in the middle of building more when he abdicated.
He sold us Louisiana.
He sold, America doubled its size with the Louisiana Purchase. That's a major thing. So, I mean, you're not going to see a positive portrayal, especially of a European male like that. So I think there is something to that. Hopefully that is a passing phase, but and it's okay to tell a story. Like I think we were addressing it earlier. You don't have to lionize him either. You could show the mixed bag, and I think that's the right call. The issue is there is also excellence. There are things that he did that were unprecedented. There were accomplishments that he made that, from a military point of view, are stunning. And if you're going to bother telling a story about someone who did something stunning, then you should include that too. And you should let us experience what's stunning about it. And then if he did something that's questionable, show that too. I'm not saying whitewash it or hide something or don't show anything that might make him look bad. Put them both in there. Show us the man, because that's the truth. That's what happened. He did both. You can do both, and you could tell a great story.
And what we tell that, but again, we've talked about here that, and we say on this channel that a critical component of telling a good story is the back and forth.
Absolutely.
Is it this, or is it this? Is it this? Instead of just choosing one particular thing and the movie being a lecture, it's going to struggle with this back and forth, because that could have been an important part of thing that you take away today, that, okay, this guy, and if you had those moments when you were like, oh my God, I would follow this guy forever. And then there are the other elements to it too. You're dealing with the back and forth, and you're dealing with something you're like, that that should be relevant today. You're like, oh my God. So what does that mean for today about whether I follow this person or what does it mean for this person's past? This person has done this. That would actually bring it into today.
You know what to do? You want to bring it into today? Show him as a young revolutionary in France.
Yes.
You know, the young, educated class of people are like, we don't like the system. We hate the establishment.
Well, you
show them
that
they were there. They were on the street. The French Revolution is a period of time where that was relevant and true. And, there's a spirit, I would say, amongst the younger generation to try to be like that on some level. Well, here's a guy who did all that, and it turned him into one of the worst autocrats in terms of pure autocratic power, someone who did get corrupted by it. So you could show that whole thing, and you could be honest about it. And the movie is based on history. Just to address Heather G's question, it is based on history. It's just it's like an ultra abridged version of history. And as someone who writes about historical women and is very favorable and along those lines, this felt more like Josephine was intruding into his story. Like they were trying to force her story into his a little bit where it didn't belong. So
Josephine, like, that's why I don't think it's like, God, it's Josephine. How many scenes were Josephine just looking at that lake?
Yeah, well,
Josephine looking at that lake a lot.
She wasn't that interesting given what. So here's cinema. right? We're in an IMAX or a big screen. We've got Napoleonic armies lurking around, waiting to take screen time. And while I'm waiting for this, I've got her doing very mundane things on screen. And I just felt, I was like, man, this one isn't your story, Josephine. I'm sorry. We should be focusing on Napoleon here. Or if you want, tell a Josephine story. Call it Josephine. Yeah, sure. Focus on Vanessa Kirby's character and have Napoleon be a side character. You could do that too. You could have her story with just Josephine, and it probably would have looked a lot like this movie. I think if you're going to focus on Napoleon, focus on Napoleon. There's no shame in it.
When Napoleon brings his son to Josephine at her house or whatever, and she's out there by the lake again.
Yeah.
I remember I was watching that scene and I was going, I hope Josephine jumps in the lake and drowns this kid. I don't know if that happened historically or not. Like, forget whatever happened historically. Just to do something in this movie, to get something interesting happening in this movie and to something not boring in this movie. I was like, do you know what would really, I was watching that scene. I was going, you know what would really shake up this movie right now? Which, screw historicity at this point. We need some drama.
Josephine,
she runs in the lake with this kid and drowns it right there before Napoleon. And like, okay, that would have given us some drama in this movie, but it was just not there.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. So imagine if there's a stage, and off stage are the entire Napoleonic armies.
I can't believe James says I had the same thought.
Wow, this took a dark turn.
I know. It's like we were looking at this movie. Gee, somebody, please drown this infant. That'll make this movie. But please, someone drown this.
Oh man.
Okay.
Well, drowning infants. We go there on this channel.
Okay.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you wanted to focus on romance, that's great. Sherry Lee, you could tell a romantic story. The problem is, you've got Napoleon there, and you've got all of this history that he's attached to. I think if you're going to tell the romantic story, it should have been the movie should have been about Josephine and her relationship with Napoleon. If you're going to shift to Napoleon, you got to deliver the goods. Napoleon comes with some major earmarks in history. So, I mean, deliver on those. Unless you want to subvert expectations and Ryan Johnson this thing.
Well, okay. So actually, I was looking this up. I thought there was a 1987 drama for one season called Napoleon and Josephine, a love story.
Well, but is that the most interesting story you could tell?
No, I don't know. No. Probably.
That's what I'm saying. Like, yeah, sure, you could do it. But what about all the other big ticket items that are sitting there?
It was kind of like, well, I think when I was obsessed with Napoleon, there was Napoleon, but people told me don't watch that because whatever you're looking for is not going to be in Napoleon and Josephine. I mean, I don't know if it's good or not. I mean, it might be fantastic for what it is. But I was like, oh, Napoleon, Josephine. No, that's not what you're really looking for. It reminds me of like, there's also Robin and Marion.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think that's Sean Connery. But also I think it was, and I was big into Robin Hood, King Arthur and Robin Hood and Ivanhoe and all of that. And then it's like, okay, look, it's Robin and Marion. Okay, I'll watch that. And I think my mother was like, no, you don't actually want to watch that because anything you're interested in about Robin Hood is not going to be in this movie. And I think I eventually did watch it. All right, well, okay, fine, I'll put it on, whatever. And then I was like, this is Robin Hood? So it would probably be the same kind of thing with Napoleon. It's like, of all the most important things, I mean, not, of course, Maid Marian is an important part of Robin Hood and the romance and all of that. But like, if you just extract Robin Hood and Robin and Marian, it didn't go very well.
Well, it's like telling a story about the Titanic, but not showing the sinking. It's just like, well, you're missing a really big opportunity, in history if you're going to tell this other story.
All right. So then I guess to lead into the conversation that we were talking about having next, I would say, here's the question. what was this movie about? And what should it have been about, or what could it have been about?
It was about Napoleon and Josephine through different periods of the Napoleonic era, from the French Revolution to the Reign of Terror to the first battles with Europe to the Egypt when he comes back to Russia and then Waterloo. So it's just their relationship through each of these like earmarked periods. I think that's what it's about. And whoever the storyteller was, I think they got hung up on the fact that Josephine was like the last word he said. So they tried to tell that through story. That was their through line. Problem, like I said earlier, is that too much else that was important or relevant or interesting was just discarded in service of this through line, the Napoleon Josephine story. So that's what it's about. It's brief snapshots of eras through the lens and focus of his relationship with Josephine. I mean, that's what this is.
I disagree, and I agree with what James is saying, that it wasn't about anything. It didn't carry a theme. It was just a sequence of events. That's what I was talking about.
Through the lens of Josephine, but through the lens of their relationship.
Yeah, but I'm trying to understand, what's the theme of their relationship? Is it something like love conquers all, or love will destroy you, or behind every man is a better woman, or what? Like, when I'm looking about, if it was going to be, I mean, Napoleon and Josephine obviously took up a lot of screen time. Yeah. But when I'm like, okay, if that's what it is, if this is Napoleon and Josephine, what is this movie about? And I'm trying to understand what message I'm trying to get about their relationship. I don't come up with it. I come up with what
I think that it was tumultuous, and yet they stayed with each other on some level, because it ends with talking about how he says like France something and Josephine. Those were his last
Does that
three
mean
words.
That you should be loyal through all, that loyalty and love is important?
Well, that maybe that this was an anchor despite all the change that occurred during not only his era, but through him directly, that there was a constant, and it was their relationship. That seems to be one suggested theme that this could be portraying. I'm not saying it's a great one. I'm saying maybe
that's the best we can do. Maybe that's the best we can come up with, because I didn't come up with anything that this movie was particularly about.
Well, it's definitely about the relationship, or definitely through that lens.
It features the relationship a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say that, because I like this idea that it was just a sequence of events. And Wild Barley even also mentioned that he was like, you guys talked about how Ahsoka was just a sequence of events. And here we have this movie that is just a sequence of events as well. That's what I think that was going on.
Well, the difference between Ahsoka and Napoleon is this is actual history. So the sequence of events is established to some extent. And so there's some effort by the storyteller to remain chronological. And by the way, there were some things out of chronology in this. But like, she was dead by the time Battle of Waterloo took place. She wasn't alive. Josephine.
Okay, but yes. Okay, so here's the sequence of events. But here's what I'm saying, and we've talked about this on this before. We've talked about it in the context of fantasy. We haven't talked about it in the context of history. But here is a fantastic example of where you can apply this to history, and it even makes more sense because it's not something that's made up in fantasy. It's something that's actually historical. We've said that, like, hey, what if we sat down? I mean, like a lot of people do, and who want to be world builders and fantasy authors, and they write up 100 years of history of war, and this person's dethroned and this person's rethroned, and the history and the war between this group and this group and this group, and you end up with this long sequence of events that's this fantastic history that you've made up. You come to the point where we've talked about a lot, that a sequence of events, this history you've developed, is not a story, and it's your job to reach into that sequence of events and pull out what is actually the story, because stories are structured in certain ways. There are a variety of different stories, but there's some story in there, which is not just a sequence of events. And it's you, and you need to go realize that, hey, nobody cares about your history like you do. You need to actually come up with a story. Now, here we have a situation where we do actually have the history, like 22 years of Napoleonic history, give or take, something like that. So we've got this incredibly strong incredible sequence of events. I mean, unbelievable sequence of events. And you're like, man, here I've got all of this sequence of events, and that's history, but it's your job as a storyteller, whoever's writing the script, to x-ray that history, look into it, and extract what story it is that needed to be told. And I think there are multiple stories that could have been told.
Right. So you're right. You're totally right. It is up to the storyteller to find those through lines. What is it that you want to focus on? Because you can't tell everything. I'm writing historical fiction. There are certain things I just can't get to. It's not going to be included. I'm going to have to lop it off. My job is to figure out what I think is the most compelling and then present that in a coherent way. I've already agreed, and I still agree, that this did not do an excellent job at doing that. But you're asking what it is, and it is an attempt to tell a story of all of these historical events. And the most central theme in the story is the relationship between Napoleon and Josephine. That's the only thing I could see. Otherwise, why include that entire scene with the divorce and all of these scenes with Josephine? She's otherwise irrelevant to Napoleon's mark on history, which is where you and I tend to gravitate. Probably a lot of people in the chat gravitate toward that. And I think to Positive Fandom's earlier points, if you're going to focus on the Josephine Napoleon, why not show us the positive romantic side of it? They tended to just say flip, flop, flip, flop, flip, flop. However, they stayed with each other through the end. There was some anchor there between these two. He didn't kill her. He didn't divorce, he didn't leave her completely. He didn't say, I hate her at the end. At the end, he still loved her. So I think that was what this movie is. Whether it's good, totally different question.
Okay. Then what should it have been? If you had these 22 years of Napoleonic history and you said, we got to tell a movie, what story would you have told?
I would have zeroed in
about?
I would have zeroed in right on him, and I would have tried to convey what makes this individual unique in history. And I would have started with him early on as a young man in the French Revolution who has some of his own ideas, and I would have tried to develop visually how his mind works when he worked out a physical problem like Toulon. So here he is. Here's this young guy, 24 years old. What does he see? What's going on in this guy's head? What made him decide to act on what he saw? And then when he wins, what does it mean? When he looks at a battlefield, what does it mean? I would have emphasized his mind and his thinking. And I like what you said too, actually, this idea of portraying him probably accurately as high energy and manic and covering so many things at once, going to do this thing and then going to do how his mind worked. I would have tried to capture that. The movie A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe is a story that tries to show how a man's mind works. Mm-hmm. Remember, even when he was going through delusions, I love this about this movie. He would look at a magazine and the way the filmmaker showed it, he would illuminate certain words and show connections between letters and words and paragraphs. And he'd be looking at it in his mind, all delusion. There was nothing there. They were fantasy patterns he was picking up on. But the way the filmmaker told you, you saw it through his eyes. So you were picking up all these patterns like a genius. Do that, portray that, show his genius in the film itself, and then deliver on the big ticket moments in history and give us the context, give us the personalities behind it, and deliver on the big stuff, deliver on Napoleon. That's what I would have done. And I probably wouldn't have even attempted this in under 3 hours. I think that's insane. This should have been long-form storytelling, a trilogy at minimum, preferably long-form storytelling on a streaming service with multiple episodes and perhaps multiple seasons with the same actors going through these different phases, long-winded. Let's deliver on it. Otherwise, what are you doing? What are you doing with Napoleon? You've got the big pieces. So think of a toy box. You're going to open the toy box. You're pulling out Napoleon. You're pulling out the Alps. You're pulling out Waterloo. You're pulling out Trafalgar. These are some of the biggest toys in the toy box. If you're going to play with those toys, then you got to deliver. Otherwise, leave them in the toy box. That's kind of where I'm at. But I would have focused on him individually much more.
Okay. I can think of, and this is not all of them, but I just on a basic brainstorming came up with about 6 different stories that could have been told. But if you tasked me to say, we're going to do a Napoleon movie, let's say it's movies that I didn't have an option to do like a 5-season cover all of Napoleon's life. Let's say but if somebody said I need to do a Napoleon movie, but that's basically all my instructions. I would start by brainstorming different stories that I think could have been told.
In a 2-hour to 3-hour format?
In a 2 to 3 hour kind of thing. So I wouldn't try to tackle in that time frame the entire Napoleonic era.
Smart.
Okay. So given those constraints, one story that I could have told is how one dynamic young man who takes action can change the course of history.
Okay.
That's one story that can be told in the context of Napoleon. And that would mean that mainly what I'm dealing with is Toulon and the Italian campaign.
But even the Italian campaign is a long story. But I see what you're saying. You're still staying more focused.
I'm being more focused. This is just the first pass. This is still just the first pass.
No, that's good.
But something like Toulon to the Italian campaign, we're going to have an extremely young, vibrant, dynamic man who is dealing with the horrors of the French Revolution. Now, he's an opportunist, but we're going to show how, despite all of these forces that are, the whole of the French Revolution, everything that's going on, if you got direction, you're a dynamic, you're a person like Napoleon, you can take charge and you can change the course of history. That's one story that could be told. Okay, another story that could be told if you wanted a political bent on this. And this is a question that I ask myself all the time, and even as a kid when I was interested in Napoleon. It was the question of how in the hell can something like the French Revolution, which is so brutal, and everything that the French Revolution was, in order to depose a monarchy, how the hell can you have a monarchy go through the French Revolution and then end up with an emperor?
Totally.
So if you wanted a story about political upheaval and people saying, you were talking about, here's the status quo, and now here we're going to charge in and we're going to shake up everything to the extent of the French Revolution, how by the time everything goes around and whatever, you end up with an emperor?
Yeah, like liberty, fraternity, equality.
How emperor? How does that happen? So you could tell a really, I think, poignant story about political motivations, people's political thought processes, what goes on if you do something like a revolution. I mean, in the United States, we have a rather glorious, not exactly the word I'm looking for, but whatever, positive, at least positive view of what it means to go through a revolution. Because we went through the American Revolution and look what we came out. But most
one of the few
time,
examples of a really successful revolution that led to something positive.
Exactly. Most of the time. So we have this really, do you want to go through a revolution? In the United States, we're like, yeah, let's have a revolution because look what we ended up with. I mean, revolutions are great. The Revolutionary
War. Not usually.
I studied the Revolutionary War a lot. I loved the Revolutionary War as a kid. Still love it. Revolutionary War. This is fantastic. Look what you get on the other side of a revolution. You have a different opinion of that if you've gone through the French Revolution. So, and many other revolutions on the planet. So if you could I want to tell a political story about the nature of humanity, the nature of revolutions,
the tragedy of revolutions,
because in this movie, somebody I don't even know who it was comes up to him and says, "You should be king." And I thought at that moment that we were about to get into some politics about the French Revolution and the philosophy of the French Revolution, because Napoleon was not the king of France. Because I thought he was going to completely scoff at that. I'm a revolutionary, a king. We just got rid of a king. I can't possibly be a king. But in this movie, we went right from the idea that you should be a king to I'm going to crown myself emperor. But and importantly, so how do you get around that? I would have discussed that. I can't be king. And also, he is not emperor of France. Napoleon was not the emperor of France. He was the emperor of the French.
The French. Yeah.
Right. So what does that mean? Is that different? Is it just different words for the same thing? Or is it meaningful? Do I want to have him talk about what's the difference between being king of France and emperor of the French? Like, if I'm going to tell a story about politics and revolution, I would engage with those subjects.
I think that's great. Because, yeah, then you're showing not only a full circle, but almost full circle to the point where it's the opposite meaning of the principles of the French Revolution. You know, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, when I grew up, they were taught as like kindred, but really they're completely separate. The only thing they had in common was their opposition to a monarch as the governing system. But after that, you know, the French Revolution jumps the rails, and it really shows also the danger of this idea of total change. Remember, they changed like the calendar and like they changed everything.
They get rid of the traditional French, the French regions to make them the departments. That's one thing I'll never forgive Napoleon for that. That's why we don't have like Normandy in France anymore, you know, and things like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the different departments of France, he wanted to specifically change the Bordeaux and Normandy, which are the traditional like almost countries within France that have existed from medieval times that had dukes and, you know, all of this, that this
From
is
the feudal
Normandy.
system.
And now Napoleon got rid of all that and was like, we can't have like, a Normandy type of nationalism almost, feeling in France. We've got to break that apart because we're all French now. So that involves breaking apart Normandy and Bordeaux and all of that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so that's one thing you could tell. Okay, another story that I could tell is I could tell a story about hubris. Like, if you are on top of the world, can you be brought low by your own hubris? Okay, in that case, I would start to tell a story about the Russian campaign. Like, all right, we're going to start basically with with Napoleon and his situation in Russia. We haven't actually talked about his relationship with Tsar Alexander, but I will talk about that later. But the situation where if you're on top of the world, then you would have gone into a lot more detail about the Russian campaign, and Napoleon could have gotten out of Russia. One of the great lessons that people like you and me learn as a kid is don't invade Russia in the winter. And, we look at, Napoleon and Hitler, like, don't do that. Like, look at this. I mean, like, for somebody like me, I'm going to talk about this later. I'm going to talk about this later, Sable. I've got exactly which one I'm going to talk about. But, you and I, if you're studying history like that, that's one of the things, like, by the time you're in 5th and 6th grade, oh my God, don't invade Russia in the wintertime because, look at this happened. So, but if you wanted to say, if you are basically at the height of power, can you become so enamored with your own invincibility that you don't listen to people and that you pay this tremendous cost for this? That's the story of the Russia campaign. And it's not because, again, you would have had the back and forth in that story too, because it's not like everything that happened in Napoleon's Russia campaign was in fact completely some kind of boneheaded decision by Napoleon. Like, there were a lot of reasons why he did what he did, even thinking that once I get to Moscow, Tsar Alexander is going to surrender because I have Moscow. Yeah. And he stays in Moscow for a long time, like thinking any moment now he's going to surrender. Like, I've got it. Like, what is, and all the different things that we talked about once I get to Moscow, it'll be over. And then, oh my God, the shock of it being empty. You play up all of that drama. You could tell a story basically of the fall and of the cost of hubris. Partially. Yes, in that story. So I could tell that story, in which case I would focus on the Russian campaign.
Oh yeah. Huge.
I would do that.
Part of that story in total.
Another story that you could tell is how you can, in fact, be the best in the world and still lose. Okay, in which case I would then talk about Leipzig and the campaign to defend Paris and the loss of Paris and all of this. Because you could say Napoleon is the best in the world, but eventually at some point, it doesn't matter how good you are. if you take on the entire world,
Yep.
eventually you lose. And that's the lesson of Leipzig, and then going into the French campaign, the campaign in France, and the loss of Paris. So that's what I would have played up. That, you know, Napoleon, and for a long time he would get a lot of people angry at him, and he could defeat them in detail. Okay, wait a minute. Everybody's angry at me, but I got this army over here and that army over there and that army over there. First, I'm going to go and I'm going to, you know, crush the Austrians before the Russians can get here, and then I'll go crush the Russians. And so even if strategically everybody was against him, he was able to keep the battlefield to a defeat in detail, I suppose that you would say. So, but once you get to something like Leipzig, and that's why, like, you know, there was like a 2% chance that he could have gotten out there. Like if Murat had actually captured all of the foreign monarchs, I mean, that probably actually would have done it. There's like a 2% chance that would happen. But otherwise, like, you're looking at Leipzig. I mean, you got to say there's a chance always, like when something like that, you know, something crazy could happen when you're talking about that. But really, when you're looking at Leipzig and you're like, okay, you reach a point, and this would be the lesson of the movie, that you reach a point where it doesn't matter how good you are anymore. You've made everybody angry at you, and they are all here on the battlefield. It's not an opportunity for you to defeat them in detail on different battlefields. Like, you've made the world angry at you, and they are all right here.
They're here. They showed up.
That's, you know, it doesn't matter at that point. So that's an interesting one, that, you know, it doesn't matter how. So that's an interesting lesson. It doesn't matter how good you are if you take on the entire world and they're all here on the battlefield. You know, like, it doesn't matter at that point. That's also a lesson in hubris right there. I would take a look at, you can also see, if you want to go back to the political story, you could talk about why people embrace Napoleon. After all of that, we have some weird stuff in this movie where you've got, like, Borodino. I remember Borodino. My two uncles used to play the Avalon Hill Borodino game together. I mean, Borodino, that's also the Battle of Borodino.
That's a big one, yeah.
Imbued in my mind. That I don't know if I still have it around here. I don't know where it is. But, like, my uncle had the Borodino Avalon Hill war game. And he and his brother played it all the time. We had Borodino. So the Battle of Borodino was a big part of this. After you go through the Battle of Borodino, you go through all of this, and then it collapses. Why do people love Napoleon? Like, why do you gravitate to somebody like that? In which case, you start to emphasize Napoleon's return. You slide this later to Napoleon's return from Elba, and you play up why. Because what I was saying with Borodino is because in that movie, you get a very brief Borodino. Like, a very brief Borodino. And it even puts up on the screen French casualties. Okay, you know, that was like however many dead for France, which is something you return to at the end, which is also kind of weird in this movie. That, like, the ending kind of message that it's sending you is, oh my God, look how many people he killed, which is an odd movie, odd way to go, odd move, if this is primarily about Napoleon and Josephine. But to end then on, hey, let's list out the number of casualties in the battles. It's kind of weird.
The body count.
But you could go that route, that, like, you could say, why in the world, after Napoleon has done that to your country? I mean, he's been very successful, but then he ultimately lost. And my God, you've lost 3 million men or whatever less before the 100 Days began. Why do people embrace him when he returns? That's a great question. In which case, you were talking about, you would start with something like, your opening scenes would be great victory. You would deal with a defeat and his exile, and then you would deal with the consequences of his return. And you would deal with why, even after you have been through the Napoleonic War, do you still embrace him?
Yeah, that's another phenomenon. I'm always amazed at the people who continue to fight wars after they're clearly lost. Like, even in, like, Japan in World War II, Hitler and his people, like, what are you hoping to achieve at this point by sticking with these guys?
Okay. Jafford says another theme. Yes, absolutely. Power corrupts. Show his path from young revolutionary to autocrat. Show Spain. Yes. Show his arrogance. Show his attempt to siege the Vatican. You could absolutely do a power corrupts arc. Yes, that's another one. I didn't say these were all of them. These were just the ones that I came up with. I would say that a power corrupts. I don't know why I didn't think of that one in the like here. Power corrupts is something you could definitely do. Okay. So now, let me take a sip here. Take a breath.
Those are 3 good ones right there. I like all of those.
Well, that was like 4 or something like that.
I thought that was 3.
4 or
okay.
5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, that was at least 5.
Oh.
Plus, you could tell a love story. I mean, you could tell a love story. I mean, in this, you could tell something about the power of love and the influence. I mean, you could. So it's like 5 or 6 different ones. Okay. So what would I tell? Hold
on. Collate a little bit. Still collating.
So of all of those stories that could be told about out of the Napoleonic Wars, if I were told to make a 2.5-hour movie, which one would I tell in today's age? Undoubtedly, the one that I would tell is the story about how a young guy with sufficient vigor and drive and determination can change the world. Undoubtedly, that's the one that I would tell today, especially to an American audience. And the reason I would do that is because it seems like our politics today, people talk about a lot, are dominated by very old people. And I do want to be clear that I don't actually have a problem with age being a barrier to doing anything if you can actually do those things. Like if you, I'm very against just an immediate, oh, you are too old, therefore you cannot do this on the basis of age. I'm very against that. I'm very for, as long as you're capable of doing it, then you can do it. But we experience a lot of things today in American politics where we have people in our government that are old and not demonstrating capability anymore. And you can demonstrate that, like, whether that is Mitch McConnell freezing, like this guy is, in the Senate and leading the Senate, and he's freezing, and you've got Joe Biden as the president, and then his major contender is also his age in Donald Trump, and then you've got what was her name, the senator who was couldn't even be there until she did recently die. That you have senators who are like incapacitated, because they can't even function in their role as a senator. That I get that a lot with people my age and young. Dianne Feinstein, that's who I was thinking of. Yeah. Dianne Feinstein was like that Dianne Feinstein is like incapable of functioning like in any way, and yet still occupies a Senate seat. And so it seems like I hear the term gerontocracy a lot, that we, rule by the old. And so if we need exactly what James is talking about, a message right now, if I were to make a movie for an American audience right now that we need to hear, and I'm going to communicate that through Napoleon, I would tell the story of how a young guy can change the course of history with sufficient determination, vigor, vitality, and vision. That's the story that America needs to hear right now. We don't need to be beholden to, like I said, it's not age, it's age it's age combined with inability to function that we should tell a story against. And that could have been Napoleon. Now, I don't know if Ridley Scott was going to tell that. But if we did the brainstorm that I just did and said, here are all of the things that I could tell, that's the story of Napoleon that I would bring out today.
I like it. I think that's awesome.
And so that we're talking about missed opportunities and whatever else. That's what should have happened. If I were a producer, director, writer right here. So that would have been something that did show Napoleon as competent, as competent, as capable.
But I think that, like I said earlier, that's part of it. This guy's not part of we don't know his name because he was incompetent. We know his name because he was ultra competent in several areas and at degrees we had not yet seen before. So I think those are relevant. We kind of have there's kind of a new way to look at history where we're like, well, but he did these other things that are deplorable from like social terms. It's like, yeah, well, we could talk about that too. But the things that he did that he was competent and excelled at, especially as they relate to history, those are pretty important things too. You don't want to devalue those things because that was a part of why he's relevant to history, why you know his name. So anyway, yeah, I think you could depict somebody as excellent and flawed. In fact, that's usually the best way to depict almost anybody because that's how all of us are. When I was talking about heroines, I was like, you show heroines without any errors, it's harder to relate to them. Once they start losing, that's when I start empathizing with them. I want them to win. I start pulling for them. And then when they do win, now, we got it. So anyway, it's good to show the flaws. It's good to show what they're also excellent at.
It seems like I'm getting some support here.
Absolutely. That was a great list, Heath.
Make the movie great stuff. Yeah, man, you would combine those things.
I thought that was great. I think you picked out several through lines that would all have been better than the one that they chose, which was a kind of bland fixation on just the Napoleon-Josephine relationship. And to your point, they don't even have much of a take on it. It's a little bit of like, here's this relationship. It anchored them. It was there through and through. And by the way, all of these historical events occurred while this was happening. It's like, you're skipping over the most important, most interesting part. I would, by the way, twin cast, Russia campaign's a big one with me because the components and what actually happened there is so singularly unique and stunning to history. The Grand Army of the Republic disappearing in the Russian winter like that. That is incredible. So I love that.
I got some details to clean up. I don't know what else there is to say. I do have some details, some things over here.
We covered most of the stuff on my list. Josephine does die before Waterloo, and that the film does not really depict that properly.
Okay, Waterloo. I mean, talk about no drama. The first thing I would say about Waterloo. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But one of the things that when I looked at that I thought was embarrassing was because we know that we're not going to have a grand battle. That we're not showing a grand battle of Waterloo. Once again, we're showing basically what looks like kind of World War I armies with the British in some trenches and the French on the other side. We're not going to show anything about the grand scope of Waterloo. We're not going to show anything about any kind of great tactics about Waterloo or anything like that. We're just going to have these two, the British and the French, kind of lined up against each other. And then in a kind of World War I kind of look, but then stop me if I'm wrong. But when you look over at the British lines, and I was like, oh my God, what are they doing? They have the stakes sticking out of the British. The British have the stakes.
The Palisades?
The stakes that are coming out, which make it look like Agincourt. Because when you think British versus French, you think Agincourt, and you think British longbowmen, and you think of have these stakes, the British longbowmen would take, and they lined up, would stick into the ground to ward off cavalry, and then sharpen the end of, so they would have those stakes. That was a British longbowman kind of thing. And then you go to World War I kind of trenches that the British are in, and they have those stakes. And to couple that with the French going, gee, the ground is soggy. I was like, no, that looks like he's trying to redo Agincourt.
Well, and
So
Ridley
correct me
Scott's
if I'm
known to
wrong.
do some
Somebody
things
please
like
tell
that.
me if the British did deploy stakes like that at Waterloo. I've never heard of that, but it just seems
I've
like
never heard of that either.
I haven't ever heard of that. But
Well,
it just
the other
seems like,
thing,
what do British do against the French? Have stakes like that, and here it's in this movie.
well, like so in Gladiator, remember the scene where they make a trench, a light trench, they put oil in it and they light it, and then the trench lights up, and the archers dip their arrows in it, and they all light at once, and then they fire at the barbarians. That's just totally made up. Someone's like, do we know that they did that? And Ridley Scott goes, well, we don't know that they didn't. So Ridley Scott can be a little cavalier with his historical details like that. So it wouldn't surprise me, Heath, if you're exactly correct that he added it because it made sense in one context and he thought it might harken back to that context by including those details here.
That whole battle, because of that, was so bad. Okay, let's ignore any historical scope at the moment. And let's just say that, okay, fine, we're just going to have kind of people lined up and we're going to have this battle. By the way, at least, so I got to give credit where credit's due, at least I saw them form squares.
Right, they did form squares.
I did like seeing them form squares. I did like that.
But let me ask you this. From what I understand with Waterloo, Napoleon charges in, the British form squares, and the advantage of the square is that as the cavalry charge passes through, you can hit them from the front, from the side, and even as they pass, you got guys shooting at them from the rear. That's the advantage. It's a tactic to nullify or do mass amount of damage to a cavalry charge. In the film, they showed the French circling these squares.
No, that is my understanding, that the square is a defensive formation to defend against a cavalry charge because you cannot be outflanked by the cavalry.
Right, but what I'm saying is the French cavalry then start circling.
They start circling.
Why would they do that? That would just...
No, you're right. And Wild Barley and I brought that up for a while. They circle, but I didn't have a problem with them circling the squares. They circle for a long time.
Yeah, because it seems like that's the one thing you should definitely not do. is people with guns at every angle is circle those guns over and over again.
The square is also more about bayonets because horses won't charge bayonets. So if you form a square and you have all of your bayonets bristling, you can form a very an impenetrable defense against cavalry. So I did like, okay, the cavalry is coming in, the squares are formed. We can circle, and because if they were just in line, you would circle and you would come in from the rear. But okay, no, they're in squares, so you circle, and then the cavalry has either got to like do a suicidal charge in or get out of there.
Yeah.
But even there, okay, so ignoring the historical scope of the battle still had no drama because the core, like if you're talking about just from the story perspective, what's going to be the drama of this battle? Napoleon's about to do it again. He's going to defeat, you would set this up, that Napoleon is about to defeat them in detail again. He's going to crush the British before the Prussians can get there, and then he will turn around and he will destroy the Prussians. And if that can happen, then Napoleon wins. So you got to set that up from from your storytelling perspective. And also even something like Wellington says, "Oh, you never could resist a frontal attack." Like that's also something that sounds like it should reference something earlier in the film that Napoleon should have, not been able to resist a frontal attack, but, carried through with it. And now Wellington being, so smart, he's going to try to draw into, but he said, it's kind of like Obi-Wan Kenobi, I have the higher ground. That was something that he said that sounded like it should really reference something earlier in the film, but didn't. So
he makes it seem like he drew him into a frontal charge when that's not at all
to do something to him. But that's what you would do. But you're like, okay, I'm from the storytelling perspective, and I got to hold him off. And then what it should look like from the storytelling perspective is that the British are this close to losing. The British need to be this close to losing, and then Blucher comes over the hill. and takes this out. Blücher does show up, but it is so anticlimactic. The British and the French are fighting. The British and the French are fighting, and there's no drama. And then Blücher shows up, and Wellington's like, "Oh, he's here." It's like, I guess we can win then. Like,
well, and to be perfectly honest, the way the film portrays it, it's almost like an inevitable loss. Napoleon's going to inevitably just cash in his army. So by the time Blücher does show up, it's like, well, he was going to lose anyway.
And
that was the tone.
From the drama, like saying nothing about history, the drama needed to be not at all clear Napoleon was going to lose. Actually, Napoleon could have won Waterloo in different scenarios too, but you would make it look like he's really going to win. The British have to be in a desperate situation. And then it just so happens, this is Gandalf coming over the hill with,
yes. Yes,
that's what the Blücher scene should have been.
That's what it is in history in a lot of ways.
But we got none of that.
Well, or even instead of, he could never resist a frontal charge. It would be nice to hear, I can't believe, some more like, why is he, I can't believe he's doing this. Why would he do, he was smart to wait it out because the British don't know that Blücher's about to arrive, right? So there would have to be a read that this is an odd impatience, that he should pick up on the impatience of the charge. And then it makes sense later when he realizes that Napoleon knew that Blücher was, Napoleon knew Blücher was going to be there. At least that's how this is depicting it. And so that's what drew Napoleon into a charge. So anyway, to your point is what I'm saying. The dialogue should have been consistent in delivering an awareness of the characters on what's going on and why in a war setting.
I have it. So, that was one of them, but I had a list of some other things that should have really been an opportunity for drama and squeezing the lemon and just were not. When I cannot believe Napoleon did not utter the words "whiff of grape" when he dispersed the royalists. And he may have written that in a letter. I'm not sure. But nonetheless, that's such classic Napoleon to me.
Yeah.
That scene is also, that scene should also be a high drama one when he decides, because he's an opportunist. And he throws in with the Republic, can you save us? Hauls the cannons into the streets, disperses the royalist crowd. Now, that was kind of generally horrific, but I was waiting for this, a dismissal of Napoleon about that. Like, after you see what Napoleon did to the people in the streets, for him to refer to that as I dispersed that with a whiff of grape.
Yeah.
That would have been great. The coronation should have had a lot more drama. The coronation looked great, like you were talking about, but I just did not. It looked great, but even like when he picked up the crown himself, like I wasn't clear that was the Pope that he was taking, but like when he picked up the crown, it was almost like they added in some ooh in post or something like that.
Well, like didn't the church members oppose that? I mean, the whole point of the church putting on the crown is that the church has some authority, some moral authority, even over
taking all of that upon himself.
Right. So there should have been when that moment happened, I heard the gasps, but what I was really looking for was that the clergy were like,
well, that's why it sounded like the gasps were put in post. Because nobody actually does anything.
The clergy are like, look at Napoleon taking our authority from us.
Because that would have been the drama of a final step. If you had been playing out this political drama where, is Napoleon going to be, he's one of the consuls, he's going to be first consul, and then should he be king? No, he can't be king. He can't be emperor of France. He's going to be emperor of the French, and you're playing out all of that. And then at the end, he even crowns himself. That should have been so much drama.
Right. Well, and again, they didn't even show it was drama. If the church members on screen don't react and don't care and are pleased with Napoleon, then you've completely failed to deliver the drama of what just happened in terms of wresting authority from the church by yourself and crowning yourself, because that's what that is. The church has no authority over me. There is no higher authority than myself, which is the ultimate autocratic, temperament. And the church showed the actors and zero reaction. And so that means nothing. And Americans who don't have churches, electing presidents or putting we don't have king. So this is a context for us that's already loose, if even understood at all. The usurping the church power in that moment is a pretty big deal. If you lose, the church can excommunicate you. The Catholic, there's things the church can do to rulers. But if you piss them off like that, none of that was captured at all in that scene.
In this scene. It was looked great, but no emotion. Another point that could have, depending on what story you're telling, but should have in this, carried a lot more weight, is the friendship between Napoleon and Tsar Alexander. This really should have been played up, or I would have. They met in the middle of a river. This is another one of those situations where I was like, what, does he just have no budget? Because, like, how cool is that Napoleon and Tsar Alexander meet in the middle of a river? I mean, that could be some spectacular cinematography.
Yeah, totally.
Like that. And they have this, and so instead it's just got to be like in a tent or something. And I was going, God, I mean, you're looking for, like, so often you have to take, like, well, this happened, let's play up the drama and let's put it in a new situation and something better. Here's a situation where, like, this really happened, like, in the middle of a river between two armies, between two emperors meeting one another. Man, that's cool. And yet in this movie, they completely de-dramatize it to, hey, let's just meet in, like, two guys, I guess that's COVID protocol, in a tent and have this. And that scene did not work at all. First of all, because you de-dramatized it, but also because Joaquin Phoenix is so old. That scene, the entire friendship between Napoleon and Tsar Alexander, should have been the friendship between two young, ambitious guys who are emperors. Like, they were the same age. I mean, in fact, I'm not sure if they were, like, identical in years, but I mean, they're
generation
young guys. You're looking at Joaquin Phoenix and the guy who's playing Tsar Alexander. Wild Barley said the guy who played Tsar Alexander should have played Napoleon. Maybe he should have. Because you needed at that point two young guys who, by virtue of their own just friendship, because of their own ambition, like mutual recognition of ambition, like in each other, like, hey, we could rule the world together, and everything like that. Meeting in the middle of a river, that's what that scene should have had. And you would play up the friendship between him and Tsar Alexander, especially if you're going into the Russian campaign. Then you would play up the betrayal by Tsar Alexander, but also the marriage of Napoleon to the Austrian. Like, you would be forgiven in this movie to not realize that it wasn't the Russian that he married, because she was there, and they make a point that she's young. She's like, the Russian is 15 or whatever. Yeah. But she's really, who shows up with the Austrian is also really young. So you'd be completely forgiven from the context of this movie to not realize that it wasn't the Russian sister that he married, but he married the Austrian, and that starts to split things up. But that would have been drama. They, Napoleon and Alexander, best of buds, all of this. Then these things fraction, and Alexander has these grievances, and Napoleon has these grievances, and then it ends up with the invasion of Russia. That would have been drama.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely just not present.
Yeah, that's cool. That's actually interesting. Focusing on the friendship between Napoleon and Alexander has its own through line, possibly much more interesting than him and Josephine. Yeah, I agree with that. I like that a lot.
I mentioned the loss of Paris earlier, that you could have totally done this and made that really dramatic when he sits down, especially if he's a dramatic individual, and now he's broken. That could have been a lot of drama. Okay, so I said that there's just generally no politics or explanation of these situations as I've gone on. The bearing of the breast, there was another note about great scenes that should have been really dramatic, but we've talked about that. The bearing of the breast in his return from Elba,
sure.
That one should have been squeezed. The lemon, that should have been a lemon that was squeezed a lot more. But we've talked about that already. God, when I at the very end of that movie, I was like, do not have him fall over. Do not have him fall over. And he fell over. That was so dumb. That was so dumb.
That's hysterical.
Another great Napoleonic scene on that level as far as drama and things that are iconic Napoleon. I believe this was in the Italian campaign when he shows up for command and no one takes their hat off. So he shows up to command. I believe it's the army in Italy, and he shows up because he's this young guy. This would be part of the young kind of thing, that he shows up to all of the officers that he's in command of, and he's standing there at the table, and nobody's taking their hat off to him, and so he takes his hat off, and then everybody else takes their hat off as well, and then he puts his back on real fast. Like that's iconic Napoleon to me, right? Like,
yeah, it is.
That would have been a fantastic scene to have as a young, vibrant Napoleon who feels like he's not getting the respect that he should be. All right, now before we then go and charge into the Italian campaign.
Well, and that would show some interaction between him and the army.
His army and the marshals. Then you would have his marshals and his generals that he's dealing with.
Yeah.
God, it could. So believe it or not, I mean, this feels really crazy. That's all my notes, and we're only 3.5 hours into this. I feel like I've been at this for a lot longer than 3.5 hours.
Well, but keep in mind, this isn't a movie that we're well versed in. We both saw it once.
Right. This was our first impression after one viewing. This is what was just in our minds as a result of one viewing. What after we watched it, we could write down and think to critique.
That's right. And I was thinking about it. You talk about squeezing more lemonade out of the lemon. This was essentially a show of lemons, just a string of lemons. They don't squeeze much out of any of them. It was it's like the ultra abridged version of Napoleon in history, with an emphasis on his relationship with Josephine. And, it is what it is at this point. It's out. I guess there's going to be a 4-hour cut coming.
Well, actually, yeah, I mean, that's actually Wild Barley had something to say about that. He said that, I wonder if in the inevitable Scott director's cut, we will simply eschew the pantomime of drama and recut it as a comedy. It would explain the bizarre sight gags like Ramsey's mummy and any sex scene. So yeah, because that could be true, that if there's like a 4-hour cut, you might not have to do so much exposition in letters that, here, let me bridge some of this with some dialogue. By the way, squeeze the lemon. That comes from Roz Morris. She wrote a book called Nail Your Novel, which I read years ago. And she uses I at least got this phrase from her. I think she's the originator of it. I don't think she got it from someplace else, but maybe she did. But I know it from the book Nail Your Novel by Roz Morris. And she uses the expression squeeze the lemon, which means anytime that you come up to a scene of drama, squeeze it for every bit of drama you can. If you can find out more, if you can find some way for it to be more dramatic, to give it more emotional impact or more emotional weight, then you should, according to her book. And she calls that squeezing the lemon. You found a lemon, squeeze it for everything that you can get out of it. So that's why I use that. That's what that phrase means. When you come to a scene where it's dramatic, squeeze it for everything that you can get out of it.
Well, it's a good phrase. And this is a good movie to show where that's not being done a lot.
It's not being done.
Yeah. So
yeah,
I guess at the end of the day, I am still disappointed because after watching that trailer, my expectations were pretty much sky high. And, as an author of historical fiction, I was hoping that the great historical epic would become storming back in and that everyone would be talking about this. And but I think they just missed too many important details were missed for this to be a complete story. You will probably see it get nominated for a couple of categories.
Well, if it's costuming and that kind of thing, then I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean, it'll get nominated for those things, but you're not going to see an original screenplay, and I don't think you're going to see any acting. I wonder about Vanessa Kirby, because she did some good stuff. She did some good acting in this, but I don't know if that was an award-winning performance with what she had. In particular, her scene during the divorce, I thought was particularly poignant in terms of her acting ability.
Is there anything else that needs to be addressed?
I don't think so. I think we covered this pretty good. I mean,
John, we did talk about music. I see John talking about music. We did talk about music earlier.
We did. I thought it was a mixed bag. There's a couple good tracks. If you look at the soundtrack, Toulon is probably my favorite track on this. But I did not think it. And it's, in fact, let me see which ones I liked. There was a couple that I liked. I liked Toulon, I liked Russia, and I liked Downfall. Those are some really good tracks on the soundtrack. So, but there's a lot of misses on that soundtrack as well. Pretty consistent with this film. For me, plenty of misses along with the things that I thought hit.
All right. Well, I think there was a lot of comments going on too. Of course, I had a lot going on. There's a lot of comments too, and I hope I got to the comments. I know some people comment on things that we talked about earlier and things like that that was brought up in the comments. But hopefully, we got all of that as well. But I thought this was a great talk. Like I said, I feel like we've been here for 5 hours, but this I think I covered everything that I was going for, and I think we got to the heart. And I hope actually that we brought up things that other people on YouTube have not been talking about. I don't know that because I have deliberately not watched anybody else's Napoleon
Same
commentary.
here.
Now I might go watch some, but I hope I'm going to clip this as well. I hope that some of the things that we've said here are unique on YouTube.
Yes. Well, anyway, for me, as a lover of history, and Heath, I'm pretty sure you fit this category. We spent a lot of time talking about story structure, storytelling. It was kind of fun to stray a little bit into just talking history. Something we don't always get a chance to do. It's fun to talk history. I love history. Believe it or not, there's a lot of similarities between this era and Justinian's. Napoleon also recodifies the law.
Napoleon. I know that would be another thing you could show him. Like not only making new rules for the theater in Paris, but the Napoleonic code. The Napoleonic code.
Right. So there's only been a few codexes like this in history. Justinian's one of them. Napoleon's another. His wife, Josephine, had a checkered past. Theodora has a checkered past. There's a lot of military conquests and a flourishing of culture before it retracts again. Same thing in France. So it was just interesting. Even as I was watching it, I was like, man, there's a lot of similarities between this era and the era I'm writing about. It's just totally different. It's separated by 1,200 years.
Well, Doug, do you want to tell everybody, give everybody a send off to come and get your book here?
Yeah. So if you're interested in a great
you didn't see the beginning.
What's that?
I said if you didn't see the beginning, if you're here with us,
I highly recommend this book right here. I do. If you love historical fiction, if you want a story that captures history and a little bit of romance, even this is a good book. It's on Audible. The Mary Sarah is the narrator. She does a great job. There was original music written for this, for the audiobook, but it's a great story. I'm very proud of it. I'm working on the sequel, book 2, right now, that picks up right where this book leaves off. So if you're in for a big epic with epic historical figures, hopefully you'll read this one and say, this is what Napoleon could have been.
And then I have got going on right now. We've had a couple of people come in. Thank you so much to everybody who's coming in for the Trial of St. Gabriel. This is my short story. It's just a short story. You can get it for $4 on Kickstarter. Just $4 on Kickstarter. Get the ebook. You can get a soft copy for just a few dollars more. But if you want a physical copy, but you can get the ebook here for just $4 on Kickstarter. The Trial of St. Gabriel, the dark short story of the Bethlehem Massacre for Christmas, which is not something people talk about a lot. They don't talk about the massacre, Herod's massacre of the innocents, a lot, but I engage with this directly in this story. It's not a children's story here for Christmas. This is a Christmas story that deals with prophecy and good and evil and destiny, and when it is morally right to obey or disobey God, especially when that would be something that would lead to some type of catastrophe. And it's so it's here on Kickstarter right now. If you would like one, Trial of St. Gabriel, I'll put that right here. And actually, next Tuesday, we're going to be talking about the Christmas story. So we got to pull that up. I got to I'll make up all the links next time. But next Tuesday, we're going to be talking about the Christmas story from the literary perspective of St. Luke and St. Matthew and what the Christmas story means. And then we'll also be talking about that from the Islamic perspective. Cameron's going to be here. It's going to be Doug, Brianna, Cameron, and me doing a deep dive into the Christmas story, historicity, literary perspective, conflicts in the two different stories within the biblical scriptures. We're going to talk about both of those. The Islamic perspective on the birth of Christ. Then I'll also be talking about this story and my particular interpretation, how the different choices I made in adapting the Christmas story to this story right here. We're going to be talking about that a week from tonight. And then also, yes, I was about to say that. I clicked the wrong thing. Thursday, 2 nights, I'm going to be talking to James about good and evil and storytelling. He and I are going to be talking about, so James Bacon from the comment section will be on the show on Thursday in 2 days to talk about good and evil in storytelling from the Catholic perspective.
Wow,
So,
that should be awesome.
Yeah, so he and I will be delving into that subject on Thursday. Then a week from today, we will get into the Christmas story and deep analysis and criticism, a critique, and then also my adaptation. So,
wow, that's going to be a good convo.
It's going to be a fantastic conference. I'm glad we got Cameron too. So I mean, we're going to have the 4 all-stars to go. I don't know. I don't call myself an all-star. I got the 3.
You're an all-star, Heath.
You, Brianna, and Cameron will be here on the show. So,
yeah,
all
I
right.
can't wait.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody who's watching. Please do come over. Oh, I guess let's just give it the link here. If you're watching on the Heath's Geekverse, please do come over here to the Table Talk channel. I'm going to turn the this stream private on Heath's Geekverse here in shortly, but its permanent home is over here on the Table Talk channel. If you are not subscribed to that, please do come over and subscribe. 554 subscribers. Let me refresh. Let me see if we got anybody else come in. We had 454 subscribers at the start. Oh, we still have 454 subscribers afterwards. So, okay. So we still have 554 subscribers. If you're here and you're not subscribed, please do come over and subscribe. Good night, everybody.
Yeah, good night. We appreciate the chat, by the way. You guys are awesome. Probably one of the smartest groups to possibly.
Absolutely. The chat is amazing. And if you're watching on replay, I really appreciate you as well. We really appreciate you. Please do put comments. We read the comments too. So if there's if you're watching on replay and you've got something that we didn't cover or some kind of insight, please do put it in the comment section because we read it and can respond. So everyone, have a wonderful night.
Table Talk.
Yep. I'll see you on the Morning Grind on Heath's Geekverse tomorrow morning. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.